What is up, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into an absolutely insane what if. What if Deku, instead of One for All, manifested the power to control spacetime during the entrance exam? This quirk is completely broken. Forget punching villains, this Deku can redirect attacks by bending space, teleport, and create illusions. All Might's punches are useless if you can literally move the target out of reality for a second. This power puts him on a collision course with the government, his teachers, and a version of All for One who wants to erase this glitch from the world entirely. It's going to be an insane ride, so smash that like button and subscribe. Alright, let's get into it. The world was a symphony of chaos, and Izuku Midoriya was the only one hopelessly out of tune. Concrete dust, thick and chalky, coated the back of his throat. Every direction he turned, another classmate-to-be was scoring points. A boy with naval lasers obliterated a one-pointer. A girl with pink skin melted a two-pointer into a heap of slag. Explosions, both literal and figurative, painted the cityscape of the practical exam grounds. And Izuku had nothing, 0 points, a perfect, damning circle. His legs burned, his lungs were sandpaper. He'd spent the last 7 minutes doing the one thing he was good at, running away. Every time he'd steeled himself, screwed up his courage to try and pry a piece of armor off a robot to find an off switch. Someone else would flash past in a blur of color and power, and the machine would be scrap metal before he got within 10 feet. It's no good, the familiar, venomous voice in his head whispered. You're not just quirkless, you're useless. You don't belong here. He ducked behind the corner of a building, pressing his back against the fake concrete, trying to catch his breath. 7 minutes down, 3 to go, the exam was slipping through his fingers like sand. This was it. The grand, humiliating finale to his life's stupidest dream. Then the ground began to shake. It wasn't the tremor of a nearby explosion. This was deeper, more rhythmic. A heavy, grinding beat that vibrated up through the soles of his worn red sneakers and into his teeth. Other students noticed it too. The frantic symphony of combat faltered. Heads turned. And then they all saw it. Rising from behind a block of buildings, casting a shadow that swallowed the entire street, was the 0-pointer. It was less a robot and more a walking skyscraper, a monstrosity of dark green metal and glowing red optics. It wasn't a test, it was an obstacle, a disaster you were meant to run from, and everyone did. It's the 0-pointer, forget it, let's get out of here. No points for that thing, not worth the risk. The tide of examinees turned, a panicked flood of bodies running from the approaching shadow. Izuku, as always, was swept up in the current. He ran, his mind a numb buzz of failure. This was the punctuation mark on his defeat. That's when he heard it. A small, pained gasp. He skidded to a stop, turning back against the flow. A few yards from the robot's path, pinned under a slab of fallen debris, was the kind girl from the entrance orientation. The one with the round, friendly face who had stopped him from tripping. Her name was Achako Uraraka. She was struggling, her leg trapped at an ugly angle. Her eyes were wide with panic as the 0-pointer's shadow fell over her. The world went quiet. The frantic shouts of the other students, the grinding of the robot's joints, the pounding of his own heart, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only the girl, the robot, and the shrinking space between them. He didn't think. There was no time for the voice of doubt, no room for the years of being told he was worthless. His legs, for the first time in his life, didn't run away from the danger. They ran toward it. He sprinted across the broken asphalt, his mind a perfect, crystalline blank. The 0-pointer's massive arm was rising, preparing to slam down. He wasn't going to make it. He was too slow, too weak. He had nothing. No power, no plan. He was going to die. He leaped a desperate, useless jump, putting his entire body into the motion. His arm pulled back, not for a punch, what good would that do, but for something else. A shove, a desperate, primal get-away-from-her shove, and then something broke. It wasn't his bones, not yet. It was the world. For a single, silent heartbeat, the space between his outstretched hand and the robot's metal face buckled. It was as if he'd pushed his fingers into a sheet of diamond-hard glass. The air in front of him visibly compressed, the light bending around a point just past his knuckles. The dust motes dancing in the air froze, then warped inward, sucked toward the impossible dent he was making in reality. There was no sound. No energy crackle. Just a profound, sickening pressure building in his skull. He pushed harder, fueled by a pure, selfless instinct he didn't know he possessed. The compressed space shimmered, looking for a terrifying moment like a lens of flawless, invisible ice. Then it shattered. The release was silent but absolute. The warped space didn't explode, it expanded, snapping back to its baseline state with impossible violence. The effect was instantaneous. The zero-pointer's massive head, a titan of steel and wiring that weighed hundreds of tons, was shunted sideways as if kicked by a god. It didn't fly, it was simply moved. One moment it was there, the next it was 20 feet to the right, its neck tearing away from its chassis with a horrific screech of protesting metal. The head crashed into the side of a building with a cataclysmic boom that finally broke the silence. The rest of the body, headless and unbalanced, teetered for a moment before collapsing in a tidal wave of scrap. The backlash hit Izuku like a physical blow. It wasn't an explosion, but a recoil through the fabric of the world itself. He was flung backward, end over end, his right arm twisting out of its socket with a wet, popping sound that was drowned out by the robot's death throes. He landed hard, his body skidding across the asphalt, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted in his shoulder. He gasped, but no air came. His vision swam. The world felt tilted. Through the haze of shock, he saw shimmering, heat haze-like ripples in the air where the robot's head used to be. They hung there for a second, a scar on the world, before slowly fading into nothing. He had a fleeting, bizarre thought: did I break it? Did I break the sky? Before the adrenaline gave out and the pain dragged him under into a sea of black. From 100 yards away, Katsuki Bakugo watched the whole thing. He'd been blasting his way through a cluster of three-pointers when the zero-pointer appeared. Like everyone else with a brain, he ignored it. Wasting time on a no-point obstacle was for extras. He was racking up a real score. But then he saw Deku. The useless, quirkless, stone-in-his-shoe Deku, sprinting at the damn thing. "What is that idiot doing?" he snarled to himself, pausing his assault. He expected to see Deku trip. He expected to see him get flattened. He expected to see a pathetic, last-ditch effort that would end in a trip to the infirmary. He did not expect to see reality break. Bakugo's eyes were sharp. He didn't see a punch. He didn't see an energy blast. He watched Deku's hand and it never even got close. He saw the air around the robot's head dent. Like a thumb pressing into a sheet of plastic wrap. He saw the light bend in a way that made his stomach churn. It wasn't power. It was wrong. When the robot's head was torn from its body, it wasn't with the satisfying physics of an explosion. It was with the glitches of a corrupted video file, a jump cut, there then not there. Bakugo felt a cold spike of something he hadn't felt since he was a child, genuine primal fear. It was the deep-seated, animal instinct that screamed when the rules of the universe were proven to be a lie. He watched Deku get thrown back, a limp puppet cut from its strings. He saw the last of the shimmers in the air fade away. His hands, still sparking with nitroglycerin, felt cold. The smell of ozone and burnt sugar from his own quirk was suddenly drowned out by the phantom scent of nothing. The clean, sterile smell of a world wiped clean. He scowled, the expression a familiar mask to hide the tremor in his hands. He turned away, blasting a nearby one-pointer into oblivion with more force than necessary. "What the hell?" he whispered, the words lost in the sound of his own explosion. What the hell was that? The week-long wait for the exam results was a unique form of torture. Izuku's arm was in a sling, his shoulder a dull, throbbing ache that was a constant reminder of the event he could barely believe had happened. He replayed it in his mind 1,000 times, but the memory was hazy, dreamlike. The silent pressure, the visual of the air bending, the violent snap, he tried to explain it to the doctors, to his mother. I think I pushed it," he'd said, feeling like an idiot. "But not with my hand." They'd all nodded, the same gentle, placating smile on their faces. Shock, they called it, adrenaline doing strange things to the memory. He'd clearly developed some kind of telekinetic or impact quirk, they theorized. A powerful one, judging by the result. But Izuku knew that wasn't it. It didn't feel like power from inside him. It felt like he'd reached outside of himself and used the world as a weapon. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Every so often, he'd get a dizzy spell, a sudden, lurching vertigo that made it feel like the floor was tilting beneath his feet. It only ever lasted a second, but it left him cold and sweating. When the letter from UA finally came, he almost couldn't bring himself to open it. He sat at his desk, staring at the wax seal, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. His mother hovered by the door, wringing her hands. Finally, with a trembling hand, he broke the seal. A small metal disc fell out, clattering onto his desk before projecting a hologram into the air. "I am here as a projection," All Might's voice boomed, making him jump. The hero went on, explaining the exam, praising his heroic spirit. Izuku barely heard it. His eyes were fixed on the screen displaying his score. Villain points. 0. His heart sank. It was over, all that for nothing. But that's not the whole story, All Might continued, his voice taking on a serious tone. A hero course like ours doesn't just judge destruction. We judge those who save others. For that act, the judges have awarded you rescue points. A video played, showing Uraraka talking to present Mike, asking him to give some of her points to the boy who had saved her. You saved that young woman and in doing so inspired others, a true hero's quality, All Might declared. Izuku Midoriya, you have earned 60 rescue points. The score on the screen updated. 60 points, he was in. He stared, dumbfounded, as All Might welcomed him to his hero academia. The hologram fizzled out, leaving him in the quiet of his room. Tears welled in his eyes. He'd done it. He was in. The joy was a supernova in his chest, bright and overwhelming. But just as quickly, a wave of cold dread followed in its wake. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, at his trembling hands. He'd gotten in with a power he didn't understand, a power that didn't feel like his own, a power that felt dangerous. Could he do it again? Did he even want to? The memory of the world bending to his will was exhilarating, but it was also the most terrifying experience of his life. The first day at UA passed in a surreal blur. He found Class 1A, a room full of the imposing, confident students from the exam. He saw Ida, the stern boy with engines in his legs. He saw Uraraka, who greeted him with a beaming smile and thanked him again, her eyes full of a kind of awe that made him deeply uncomfortable. And he saw Bakugo. Kaken was leaning back in his chair, feet on the desk, the very picture of arrogance. But when Izuku walked in, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in Bakugo's gaze, no mocking contempt. There was just a flash of that same look from the exam. A flicker of something unsettled, something that bordered on fear, before it was buried under a furious scowl and Bakugo turned away, refusing to look at him again. The day was a whirlwind of introductions, syllabus explanations, and Aizawa-sensei's logical ruse of a Quirk apprehension test. When it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw, his heart hammered against his ribs. Everyone was watching. Aizawa's tired, penetrating gaze was on him. He held the softball, trying to summon the feeling from the exam. He focused on the space in front of him, trying to push. Nothing happened. He tried again, sweat beading on his forehead. He felt a faint pressure in his head, a flicker of vertigo, but the air remained stubbornly normal. He threw the ball with his good arm. It landed with a pathetic thud about 40 meters away. Aizawa just sighed. The rest of the day, Izuku felt a strange mix of disappointment and profound relief. After the final bell, just as he was packing his bag, Aizawa called his name. Midoriya. You're wanted in Counselor's Office 3. Izuku's blood ran cold. Was he in trouble already? He navigated the unfamiliar halls, his anxiety mounting with every step until he found the right door. He knocked timidly. Come in. The office was sterile and impersonal. A metal desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the school grounds. Sitting behind the desk were 2 people who did not look like counselors. They were a man and a woman, both dressed in plain, sharp business suits that seemed out of place at UA. They looked more like corporate lawyers or government functionaries. The man with sharp features and neatly combed black hair gave a thin, professional smile. Izuku Midoriya, please have a seat. I'm Kenji and this is my colleague Hakamata. We're Quirk counselors from the Hero Public Safety Commission's Education Division. Izuku sat, his hands clasped nervously in his lap. Am I in trouble? Not at all, the woman, Hakamata, said. Her voice was smooth and reassuring, but her eyes were analytical, observant. We're here as a resource. UA informs us whenever a student manifests a particularly unique or powerful quirk during the entrance exam. Standard procedure, we're here to help you understand it. Kenji leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Your performance with the 0-pointer was remarkable. We've reviewed the footage extensively. Can you describe the sensation for us? What did it feel like when your quirk activated? I don't know, Izuku stammered, the truth feeling flimsy and inadequate. It was just instinct. I needed to save her. I pushed, and the recoil, Hakamata asked, her gaze unwavering. You dislocated your shoulder. Was that from the impact of landing or from the use of your power itself? I think from the power. Have you experienced any lingering effects? Kenji asked. Headaches, dizziness, nausea? Izuku hesitated, thinking of the random bouts of vertigo. Sometimes I get a little dizzy. They exchanged a look, a micro-expression so fast he almost missed it. Have you attempted to replicate the effect? Hakamata asked. Today, Izuku admitted, his face flushing with shame. During the fitness test, I couldn't. That's not unexpected, Kenji said smoothly. Quirks tied to high-stress emotional situations are often difficult to control consciously at first. Don't worry about it. He stood, extending a hand. Izuku shook it, his grip was firm and cool. "We'll be checking in with you regularly. Think of us as your personal support team. Our only goal is to help you safely master your incredible gift." The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. They gave him a card with a contact number and sent him on his way with another pair of thin smiles. Izuku walked out of the office feeling more confused than ever. The entire conversation felt scripted, their questions too precise, their reassurances too smooth. It didn't feel like a counseling session. It felt like an interrogation. He was so lost in thought that he almost walked straight into the skeletal figure standing down the hall. He yelped, stumbling back. It was All Might in his deflated form, but the hero's usual warm, fatherly smile was gone. His face, wreathed in shadow, was grim. The look in his sunken blue eyes was one of deep, profound seriousness. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper that cut through the haze of Izuku's confusion. He gestured back toward the office where the agents were. "We need to talk." All Might looked him dead in the eye, and the words he spoke next shattered the fragile ground beneath Izuku's feet. "That power of yours, it is not what I or anyone else thought it was, and you are now on a government watch list." The air in the teacher's lounge was thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken tension. Izuku sat on a worn sofa that felt like it had witnessed decades of hero angst, his hands balled into fists on his knees. Across from him, All Might sat in a matching armchair, his skeletal form seeming to shrink under the weight of his own words. Aizawa stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "A watch list," Izuku's voice was a squeak. "Why, I haven't done anything wrong." "It's not about right or wrong, kid," Aizawa's gruff voice cut in. He didn't turn from the window, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. "It's about control. You manifested a quirk that doesn't fit into any of the standard categories. It doesn't create, it doesn't transform, it doesn't enhance. It alters. That makes people nervous." All Might leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face etched with worry. "Those people you just met, Agents Kenji and Hakamata, they aren't counselors, young Midoriya. They are from the HPSC's Abnormal Quirk Response Division, a very small, very secret department. Their job isn't to nurture you, it's to contain you." Izuku's stomach twisted. Contain, the word felt like a cage. "Contain me, but I'm a UA student. And that's the only thing keeping you from being in a much less comfortable facility right now," Aizawa said bluntly. "UA's autonomy and Nezu's reputation are formidable. The commission can't just walk in and take a student, but they can watch, and they will. Every move you make, every test, every time you use your quirk, they'll be logging it." "Why all the secrecy?" Izuku asked, his mind reeling. "Why not just tell me what's going on?" All Might sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. "Because they are afraid, young Midoriya. And they believe that if you understood the true potential of your power, you would be afraid too. Perhaps they are right to think so." He looked at Aizawa, a silent question passing between them. Aizawa finally turned from the window. His eyes, usually half-lidded with exhaustion, were sharp and intense. "The Quirk Apprehension test tomorrow, it's not about seeing if you have potential, it's about establishing a baseline. They want to see what you can do, what you can't do. And most importantly, what happens when your quirk is erased." The implication hung in the air, cold and heavy. Aizawa wasn't just his teacher. He was part of the containment plan. He was the kill switch. "I will do everything in my power to protect you as my student," Aizawa said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "But my primary responsibility is to the safety of everyone else in this school. If your power proves to be unstable, I will shut it down. Do you understand?" Izuku could only nod, his throat too tight for words. He felt trapped, a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't know. His dream, so bright and new just hours ago, was already curdling into a nightmare. The next day, the air on the training field was thick with a different kind of tension. It wasn't the excited buzz of the first day. It was the sharp, competitive edge of the Quirk Apprehension test. Izuku stood with his classmates, feeling a profound sense of isolation. They were all focused on showing off, on impressing their new teacher. Izuku was just trying to survive a test that wasn't meant for him. He watched as his classmates cycled through the tests. Uraraka nullified gravity on her ball, getting an infinity score that made his stomach clench with a strange mix of pride for her and anxiety for himself. Bakugo used his explosions to propel his throw, a thunderous blast that screamed his power to the heavens. Then it was his turn. "Midoriya, you're up." Aizawa's voice was flat, but Izuku could feel the weight of his gaze. He could feel the eyes of his classmates, and he could feel the phantom eyes of the agents, undoubtedly watching from a monitor somewhere. He walked to the circle, the softball feeling heavy and alien in his hand. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic hummingbird pulse in his chest. Don't panic, he told himself. Remember the zero-pointer. It wasn't anger, it was focus. A single, clear purpose. He held the ball out in front of him. He wasn't trying to throw it, he was trying to replicate the push. He closed his eyes, picturing the space in front of the ball. He imagined pushing on it, not with his hand, but with his will. For a moment, nothing. Then he felt it. The familiar pressure in his skull, the subtle sense of vertigo. He opened his eyes. It was working. The air in front of the ball was shimmering. A perfect 50-centimeter sphere of distortion had appeared, hovering silently. It wasn't as dramatic as before, but it was real. The light passing through it bent at an odd angle, making the clouds behind it seem to warp and twist. A quiet murmur went through the students. "Whoa, what is that? It's like a lens." Izuku held his breath, concentrating. The distortion was stable. It wasn't a violent, reflexive act. It was a controlled, deliberate manifestation. A flicker of pride, of hope, ignited within him. Maybe he could control this. Maybe he could. The sphere wobbled. His brief flash of excitement had broken his concentration. The edges of the distortion began to shimmer violently, like a heat haze on asphalt. He felt a spike of panic, and the wobble worsened, the pressure in his head intensifying. No, not now, hold it together. But the fear was a feedback loop. The more he worried about it losing stability, the more unstable it became. The sphere began to visibly vibrate, emitting a low, discordant hum, like a cello string being stretched to its breaking point. "Midoriya, release it." Aizawa's voice was a sharp command, but Izuku didn't know how. He hadn't created it with his body, he'd created it with his mind. He didn't have a switch to flip. He could only watch in horror as the distortion began to crackle with faint, purple sparks of static. And then Aizawa's eyes glowed red. His hair flew up, the capture weapon around his neck stiffening. He had activated his quirk, erasure. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The moment Aizawa's power hit him, Izuku felt a profound sense of severing, as if a string connecting his mind to the world had been snipped with a pair of rusty shears. The humming, vibrating sphere of warped space didn't fade away. It collapsed. It snapped back to baseline reality with a deafening thwmp, a sound that was felt more than heard. A shockwave of displaced air erupted from the point of collapse, kicking up a cloud of dust and sending a ripple of force through the students. Several of them stumbled back, crying out in surprise. Ida, who had been standing closest, was knocked completely off his feet. The softball, which had been suspended inside the distortion, was violently ejected. It shot sideways at an impossible speed, punching a clean, spherical hole through the metal wall of the school gymnasium 50 yards away with a deafening clang. Silence descended on the field. Everyone stared, wide-eyed, first at the hole in the wall, then at Izuku, who was swaying on his feet, a trickle of blood running from his nose. The pressure in his head was gone, replaced by a throbbing, splitting migraine. The world felt solid again, but the memory of the snapback was terrifying. It was like releasing a compressed spring made of reality itself. Aizawa's hair fell back into place, his eyes returning to their normal, tired state. He blinked, the sign that his quirk had disengaged. He looked at the hole in the wall, then at Izuku, his expression grim. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but carrying across the silent field. "Test over." The debriefing happened in the same sterile office as the day before. Agents Kenji and Hakamata were there again, their professional smiles firmly in place, but their eyes held a new, sharper intensity. Aizawa stood by the door, a silent, imposing guardian. Izuku sat, dabbing at his bloody nose with a tissue, the headache still pounding behind his eyes. "That was informative," Kenji began, looking at a tablet displaying data Izuku couldn't see. A sustained spatial distortion of approximately 50 centimeters in diameter held for 45 seconds before destabilizing. "The destabilization appeared to be linked to your emotional state," Hakamata added, her tone analytical. "Your spike in anxiety directly correlated with the decay of the field's integrity. Fascinating." They didn't sound like counselors, they sounded like scientists dissecting a frog. "And the snapback effect upon quirk erasure," Kenji continued, looking up from his tablet. "The kinetic energy transfer was significant. Anything caught within one of your distortions when it's forcibly collapsed is going to be violently expelled. That's a critical piece of information." Izuku stared at them. "So what does this mean?" "It means we're beginning to understand the rules of your quirk," Hakamata said. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an official-looking document from the HPSC. At the top, it read, Phenomenon Designation IZ-1. Below that, in bold letters, Threat Level, Class C Moderate. This is your official designation, Kenji explained. It's a procedural label. The threat level isn't a judgment of your character, Midoriya. It's a calculation based on the quirk's potential for collateral damage versus your current level of control. Right now, that ratio is moderate. Izuku's hands trembled slightly. A phenomenon, not a person, a thing to be classified and contained. We need to establish the fundamentals of your power, Hakamata said, her voice shifting into a more instructional tone. Based on our observations, we can identify two primary forms of spatial damage. She tapped her tablet, and a diagram appeared on a monitor on the wall. It showed two waveforms. Microtears, she said, pointing to the first. These are small, temporary distortions like the one you created today. When you lose control or release them naturally, they heal on their own. The space reverts to its normal state with minimal disturbance. They are relatively safe. She pointed to the second waveform, which was jagged and chaotic. But what you did to the zero-pointer, that was different. That was a major rift. A forced, violent tearing of spacetime that doesn't heal on its own. It creates scars, instabilities. The aftershocks you saw, those were evidence of a major rift. If you create too many of those in one area or one that's too large, the consequences could be catastrophic. Catastrophic how? Izuku whispered. Kenji's professional smile finally faded. His expression was dead serious. A permanent, localized breakdown of physical laws. A place where gravity flickers, time dilates, and the barrier between dimensions wears thin. A place that is uninhabitable to human life. Izuku felt a chill crawl up his spine. Your training from this point forward has one goal, Aizawa spoke up from the doorway, his voice cutting through the clinical jargon. Control. We will work on your emotional stability, your focus, your endurance. You will learn to create small, stable microtears on command. You will not, under any circumstances, attempt to create another major rift. Not until we are absolutely certain you can do so without breaking the world. Later that afternoon, they took him to a specialized training room in the school's basement, a concrete bunker with walls reinforced with some kind of dark, non-reflective alloy. The agents gave him a set of black, fingerless gloves. These are equipped with cant counters, Hakamata explained. They measure the stability of any spatial distortion within a 1-meter radius. The light on the back will be green when the field is stable, yellow when it's wavering, and red when it's about to collapse. They will also provide a haptic warning, a vibration to your wrist guards. This is your support gear. Do not use your quirk without it. For the next hour, his only task was to create a stable 5-centimeter warp and hold it for 1 second. It was grueling, frustrating work. He'd focus and a tiny shimmer would appear, the light on his glove turning green. Then, a stray thought, a flicker of doubt, and it would turn yellow. He'd panic, and it would flash red, vibrating his wrist insistently before snapping back with a tiny pop. Again and again, he failed. Pop, pop, pop. Each failure was accompanied by a fresh spike of pain in his head. By the end of the session, he was slumped against the wall, exhausted and demoralized. He hadn't managed to hold a single distortion for more than a few seconds. As he was leaving, he saw a couple of his classmates, Ida and Uraraka, waiting for him down the hall. They looked concerned. Midoriya-kun, Ida said, approaching with his characteristic stiff gait. Are you all right? That was quite a display on the field. The physics of your quirk are utterly fascinating. To cause a kinetic reaction simply by collapsing a spatial field, it defies conventional mechanics. Uraraka just looked at him with wide, worried eyes. It looked like it hurt. Your nose was bleeding. Is that normal? I am fine, Izuku stammered, touched by their concern but also desperate to get away to not have to talk about it. It's a new quirk. I'm still figuring it out. It seems similar to a warping quirk, yet different, Ida mused, pushing up his glasses. But the energy signature is entirely distinct, and your ability to feel it. It's as if you're a part of the fabric of spacetime itself. Izuku just nodded, not knowing what to say. Uraraka saw his discomfort and gently steered Ida away. Come on, Ida-kun, let's not overwhelm him. We'll see you tomorrow, Deku-kun, she said, giving him a warm smile before they left. He watched them go, a painful lump forming in his throat. They were trying to connect with him, to understand. But how could they? He was a phenomenon, a threat level. A walking, talking secret that even he didn't fully comprehend. He was heading for the school gates when a car pulled up, a black sedan with tinted windows. The back door opened. Agent Hakamata looked out. Get in, Midoriya. There's something you need to see. His heart sank, but he complied, sliding into the plush leather seat. The car pulled away smoothly. Kenji was in the passenger seat and he turned to face him, his expression grim. He handed Izuku a tablet. "We debated whether to show you this," he said quietly, but Aizawa agreed. "You need to understand the stakes." On the screen was a heavily redacted file, HPSC Top Secret. The title was the Tatyama incident. Below it was a single video file. Izuku's finger trembled as he pressed play. The video was grainy, shot on a security camera. It showed a laboratory gleaming with chrome and glass. Scientists in lab coats were scrambling, alarms flashing silently on the walls. In the center of the room, a man was on his knees screaming. But the horror wasn't the man, it was the space around him. Reality itself was coming apart at the seams. The walls seemed to melt and flow like liquid, equipment stretched and compressed as if made of rubber, and flashes of other places. A forest, a cityscape, a field of stars, flickered in and out of existence in jagged, crystalline shards. The man, the epicenter of it all, looked up at the camera. His face was a mask of pure agony. "Make it stop," he shrieked, his voice distorted by the warping air. "I can't hold it." Then, with a final, silent scream, he and the space around him dissolved. Not into light, not into an explosion. They just unraveled into a chaotic storm of color and noise that consumed the entire room before the camera feed cut to static. The car was silent for a long moment. Izuku stared at the black screen, his own reflection a pale, terrified ghost. "That was 5 years ago," Hakamata said, her voice soft but heavy. "The Tatyama Geothermal Research Facility. Officially, 47 researchers died in a catastrophic geothermal event. A cover-up." She took the tablet back. "The man you just saw was Dr. Eris Thorne. He had a quirk almost identical to yours. He was the first modern case we'd ever seen. He couldn't control it. He lost his anchor to reality, and he took the entire facility with him." She met Izuku's horrified gaze in the rearview mirror. "This is why we exist, Midoriya. This is why we are watching you. You are not just a boy with a quirk. You are a walking, talking Tatyama incident waiting to happen. Do not let that happen again." The announcement of the battle trial landed in Izuku's stomach like a lead weight. Indoor person-to-person combat training. It was the moment every aspiring hero dreamed of, the first real taste of the action. For Izuku, it was a waking nightmare. He was to be pitted against other students, against his friends, with a power that could tear a hole in reality if he got scared. And then All Might drew the lots. Heroes, Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka. Villains, Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over him. Of course, of all the possible combinations, it had to be this one. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. He glanced over at Bakugo. There was no triumph in Kaken's expression, no smug grin, just a low, simmering intensity. His eyes were fixed on Izuku, not with the familiar fury of a bully, but with the focused glare of a hunter who has finally cornered a strange and unpredictable prey. "Listen up, young Midoriya," All Might's voice boomed, pulling Izuku from his spiral of panic. The hero pulled him aside as the other teams prepared, his skeletal hand resting on Izuku's good shoulder. The man's smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound empathy. "I see the fear in your eyes," All Might said, his voice low. "You are afraid of your power. Good, you should be." Izuku flinched, but All Might's grip was firm, reassuring. "I was afraid too," he confessed. "When I first inherited One for All, the power was a raging ocean inside a teacup. Every time I used it, I risked breaking myself to pieces. I lived with that fear every day." He paused, his gaze becoming incredibly sharp. "Our burdens are different. You and I, my power breaks my body. Yours could break the world. The weight is the same. An impossible, crushing weight." Izuku stared at the man who was the symbol of peace, seeing for the first time not a god, but a man who understood his terror on a fundamental level. "Do not think of it as a weapon, young Midoriya," All Might advised. "Think of it as a shield. The key to controlling an overwhelming power isn't physical strength or raw talent, it is an unbreakable heart. A will to protect that is stronger than your fear. Go in there and protect your partner, the rest will follow." All Might's words didn't banish his fear, but they gave it shape. They transformed it from a paralyzing dread into a heavy cloak of responsibility. He wasn't a walking disaster. He was a shield. He found Uraraka by the building entrance, nervously fiddling with the communication earpiece. He relayed his plan, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence as he spoke. He couldn't fight Bakugo head-on. He couldn't risk a single offensive move. Their only chance was misdirection. "I can't punch him and I can't create any big warps," Izuku explained, looking at the schematics of the building. "It's too risky, but I think I can bend things a little, just for a second. I can be the distraction while you get to the weapon. You're the key, Uraraka-san. Your zero gravity is our win condition." Uraraka looked at him, her round face serious. "Okay, Deku-kun, but what about you?" "Kakin, he's going to come for you." "I know," Izuku said, touching the haptic guards on his wrists. The cool metal was a comforting presence. "I'm counting on it." The starting buzzer blared. The trial began. Izuku and Uraraka slipped into the building, the air cool and silent. The interior was a maze of gray corridors and stark metal stairwells. "He's coming," Izuku whispered, his eyes closed. He didn't need a sensor to know. He could feel it, a subtle pressure in the air, a faint ripple in his strange, new sense of the world. Bakugo wasn't just walking, he was stalking, his explosive power and rage a tangible presence, a weight on the fabric of spacetime. "First floor, east corridor," Izuku said, opening his eyes. Fast, they crept up the stairwell. Bakugo, as predicted, was a whirlwind of violence. He wasn't searching, he was hunting. The first explosion rocked the building, a deafening roar from the floor below. He was trying to flush them out. "He's playing his part perfectly," Izuku murmured, more to himself than to Uraraka. "Now I have to play mine." They reached the third floor. The corridor stretched out before them, long and empty. At the far end, another hallway branched off to the right. "Okay," Izuku whispered into his comms. "Uraraka-san, go. Head for the fifth floor. Ida is guarding the weapon. He won't be as mobile. I'll keep Kakin busy." She gave him a worried look, then nodded, slipping away silently. Izuku took a deep breath, stepped out into the middle of the corridor, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Bakugo rounded the corner at the far end of the hall, his movements sharp and predatory. His eyes locked onto Izuku, and a cruel, triumphant grin spread across his face. "There you are, Deku." He wasn't shouting. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. "No one to save you this time. No giant robots, just you, me, and whatever cheap trick you used at the exam." He raised his gauntlet. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The light on his wrist guard was a steady, calming green. A shield, not a weapon. Protect, distract. He focused on the air about 10 feet in front of him. He didn't push, he just tweaked. He pictured the light bending, creating a false image. A subtle shimmer, a flicker of vertigo, and a duplicate of himself flickered into existence, standing just to the right of the real Izuku before sprinting down the branching corridor. It was a crude illusion, a simple spatial lens. Bakugo, acting on pure instinct, fired. AP shot. A concentrated beam of explosive energy tore through the air, aimed at the fleeing illusion. The illusion vanished a split second before the blast connected, the explosion ripping a blackened, gaping hole in the wall where it had been. Bakugo froze, his eyes widening as he realized his mistake. He whipped his head back toward the main corridor. Izuku was already gone, sprinting in the opposite direction. "You coward!" Bakugo roared, the sound echoing through the building. The hunt was on. For the next 5 minutes, the training building became Izuku's personal playground of deception. He led Bakugo on a frantic chase, a mouse taunting a tiger. He never engaged, never fought back. He just used the building and his bizarre, subtle power to stay one step ahead. He created a spatial lens over a doorway, making it look like an empty room when it was really a storage closet. Bakugo, expecting an ambush, blasted the far wall to smithereens, while Izuku was already halfway down the hall. He warped the acoustics in a stairwell, making his footsteps sound like they were coming from above when he was actually heading down. The resulting explosion took out the wrong landing. Each use was a risk, a tiny, controlled micro-tear. His head pounded, a migraine building behind his eyes. His nose began to bleed again, a slow, warm trickle down his lip. The light on his glove would flicker to yellow, his wrist guard vibrating a gentle warning, and he'd have to release the distortion before it collapsed. But it was working. He was controlling it, and he was making Bakugo furious. Katsuki Bakugo had never been so frustrated in his life. This wasn't a fight, it was a joke. Deku wasn't using a quirk, he was using glitches, he was breaking the game. The damn nerd wasn't overpowering him, he wasn't outsmarting him in any traditional sense. He was simply refusing to play by the same rules of reality. Every instinct Bakugo had, honed by years of being the strongest, was being turned against him. His aggression, his speed, his overwhelming power, it was all useless against an opponent who wasn't really there. "Stop thinking like a brawler," a voice in his head, one that sounded annoyingly like Best Jeanist, chided him. "He's not fighting you, he's fighting the space around you. So do the same." He stopped in the middle of a corridor, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, forcing the rage down. He listened, not for footsteps, for the silence. for the subtle, almost imperceptible pressure drop in the air that seemed to precede one of Deku's tricks. He felt it, to his left. A planned ambush. He grinned, a feral, sharp-toothed expression. He spun, not firing at the corner where he knew Deku was hiding, but at the ceiling above it. Stun grenade! A blinding flash of light filled the corridor, accompanied by a deafening roar. Izuku, crouched and preparing to create another illusion, cried out, throwing his arms up to shield his eyes. His concentration shattered. The stable distortion he was about to form collapsed. Bakugo burst through the smoke, his eyes wild. "Got you!" Izuku scrambled back, his vision swimming with bright spots. He was cornered. There was nowhere to run. Bakugo lunged, his right palm crackling, not with a killing blow, but with a smaller, faster explosion meant to incapacitate. There was no time to think, no time for a complex trick. He just reacted. He threw his left hand up, focusing all his will on the space directly in front of him. He didn't create a lens. He created a warp. A small, curved, shimmering distortion in the air, like a dent in a car door. Bakugo's explosion hit it head-on. The warp held for a fraction of a second, the explosive force pouring into the micro-tier. Then, following the curve Izuku had instinctively created, the energy was shunted out the side. The explosion didn't vanish. It was redirected. A torrent of fire and force erupted sideways from the warp, gouging a molten scar across the concrete wall and blasting a hole straight through to the next room. The feedback was excruciating. It felt like his brain was being squeezed in a vice. The light on his glove flashed brilliant red, the haptic guard vibrating violently against his wrist. He stumbled back, a sharp, coppery taste filling his mouth. His vision swam, the corridor tilting like the deck of a sinking ship. Bakugo stood there, his arms still outstretched, staring at the hole in the wall. He looked at the perfectly untouched space where Izuku was, then at the devastation beside it. He was panting, not from exertion, but from sheer, unadulterated shock. "You," Bakugo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and awe. "You didn't even block it." "Uraraka-san now," Izuku gasped into his comms, his voice hoarse. "He's with me." "The weapon is clear." He could hear Uraraka's determined reply, and then the sound of Ida's engines roaring to life on the floor above. The final act had begun. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, swaying. He had to keep Bakugo here for just a few more seconds. "Is that all you've got, Kaken?" he taunted, the words feeling clumsy and foreign on his tongue. It worked. The shock on Bakugo's face was replaced by pure, incandescent rage. "You damn nerd!" he roared, propelling himself forward with a series of small, precise explosions, closing the distance in a heartbeat. He was too fast. Izuku had no time to create another warp. This was it. The fight was over. Then Uraraka's voice crackled in his ear. "Deku-kun, sorry I couldn't get past Ida. He's too fast. We're on our way down." His heart sank. The plan had failed. He looked up just as Bakugo launched himself into the air for a final, decisive blow. But behind him, Izuku saw Uraraka and Ida burst into the corridor. He saw the bomb still strapped to Ida's back. He saw Uraraka, her face grim with determination, racing toward them. And in that split second, a new, desperate plan formed in his mind. A shield, protect your partner. As Bakugo descended, Izuku ignored him completely. He turned his focus to Uraraka. He reached out with his power, not creating a warp in front of himself, but directly under her. It was the riskiest move he'd ever attempted, a teleport. A blink, as Gran Torino would one day call it. The space beneath Uraraka's feet shimmered, and with a soft pop she vanished, reappearing 5 feet to the left, right next to a stunned Ida. Simultaneously, Izuku threw everything he had left into a final, defensive warp between himself and Bakugo. It was sloppy, unstable. The air cracked and sizzled. Bakugo's explosion slammed into the unstable shield. The warp buckled, absorbing most of the blast but shattering under the strain. The snapback, though weaker than on the training field, was enough. A wave of force threw both him and Bakugo back. Izuku's world dissolved into a cacophony of pain. The strain of creating two simultaneous, complex distortions was too much. It felt like his nerves were on fire. He hit the ground, his vision tunneling to a pinpoint. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was Uraraka, her hand slapping the papier-mâche bomb on Ida's back. The last thing he heard was All Might's voice booming over the intercom. "HEEROOOES-WIIN." In the darkened observation room, the students of Class 1A were silent. They had just witnessed one of the strangest, most cerebral fights they had ever seen. There had been no grand clash of power, no epic exchange of blows. Just a bizarre, tense cat-and-mouse game that ended with a strategic masterstroke. "Holy crap," Kaminari breathed. Midoriya didn't even land a punch. He didn't have to, Yahoyorozu said, her expression one of deep thought. His objective wasn't to defeat Bakugo, but to neutralize him as a threat to the mission. He controlled the battlefield completely. It was brilliant. Bakugo stood in the corner of the room, away from everyone else. He was trembling, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the screen showing the victorious Uraraka. He was staring at the replay of his own explosion being bent around Izuku. He had lost. He'd lost to Deku, and he hadn't just been beaten. He'd been rendered irrelevant. All Might watched him from the front of the room, a solemn look on his face. The kid was a prodigy, a force of nature, but today, for the first time, he had been forced to think. He had been challenged in a way that overwhelming power never could. This loss, All Might knew, would be more valuable than 100 victories. It was the first step on Bakugo's long, arduous road to becoming a true hero. In a hidden, dimly lit room miles away, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes watched the same footage, though her screen was filled with cascading lines of data and energy signatures. She was Dr. Thorne's daughter and the leader of the small, desperate group of underground researchers. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a waveform on the screen. "The redirection of the kinetic energy, the spatial lensing. The biometric feedback." A man next to her peered at the data. "The strain is immense. He can't keep this up. He's going to tear himself apart." "Exactly," the woman said, her expression grim. "The government is treating him like a bomb to be defused. All Might is training his heart. But no one is training his body to handle the paradox of his own existence. He's weaponizing his power without understanding the cost." She zoomed in on the data from the final dual warp, a spike of chaotic energy, a pattern she recognized with a chilling familiarity. It was a smaller, fainter echo of the energy signature from the Tatyama disaster. "He's stumbling in the dark," she whispered, "and he's getting dangerously close to the edge. It's time we made contact. Before he takes a step he can't come back from." The days following the battle trial settled into a tense, new normal. Izuku's classmates treated him with a strange mixture of awe and caution. He was no longer just the quiet, mumbling boy. He was the kid who beat Bakugo with mind games and a quirk that defied explanation. The whispers followed him down the hall, a constant reminder of his otherness. He mostly kept to himself, spending his lunches with Ida and Uraraka, who were the only ones who seemed unfazed by his strange abilities. His real education, however, happened after school hours. He spent every evening in the fortified basement room with Aizawa, drilling the same monotonous exercise. Create a 5-centimeter warp, hold it, release it. The agents, Kenji and Hakamata, were always there, observing from a glass-walled booth, their faces illuminated by the glow of their monitors. It was grueling. His progress was measured in single-second increments. A 3-second hold was a victory, 5 seconds was a breakthrough. The strain was immense, the migraines a constant companion, but slowly, painstakingly, he was learning. He learned to feel the rhythm of his own power, to breathe through the moments of panic, to find the quiet center in his mind where the distortions were born. He was in the middle of a record-breaking 7-second hold when the alarm blared, a shrill, piercing sound that made him lose concentration instantly. The tiny warp popped with a familiar, frustrating fizzle. "What's going on?" Izuku asked, his head throbbing. Aizawa was already moving, his capture weapon coiled in his hands. "Trouble," he said, his voice grim. "And you lot are right in the middle of it." It was the USJ incident. The word sent a jolt of pure ice through Izuku's veins. He and Aizawa raced to the central plaza, meeting up with 13 and the rest of Class 1A, who were staring in horror at the scene below. A swirling, purple-black vortex had opened at the bottom of the plaza. From it, villains were pouring out like ants from a disturbed nest. Dozens of them, a motley collection of thugs and monsters, and leading them were 3 figures. A man whose entire body was obscured by severed hands, a hulking, bird-like creature with an exposed brain, and a third figure made of elegant, swirling purple mist. As the students stared in shock, Izuku felt a sensation that was entirely new. It wasn't the vertigo of his own quirk activating. It was an external pressure, a sickness in the very fabric of the world. It was centered on the figure made of mist. The sensation was profoundly, fundamentally wrong. It felt like a jagged tear in a piece of silk, a discordant note in a perfect symphony. The wrongness of it was so intense it made his teeth ache. "Korogiri," Aizawa muttered, recognizing the villain. "A warp gate." The word resonated with Izuku. Warp, of course. Their powers were related. Korogiri didn't bend space, he punched holes in it. and Izuku could feel those holes as if they were wounds in his own body. The sensation was nauseating, a piercing headache blooming behind his eyes, but it was also clear. He could pinpoint Kurogiri's location with absolute precision, not by sight, but by this new, agonizing sense. Before he could process it, Kurogiri was upon them. The misty villain expanded, engulfing the class in his swirling vortex. "It is a pleasure to meet you," the villain's disembodied voice echoed around them. "We are the League of Villains, and we are here to kill All Might." The world dissolved into a dizzying rush of purple and black. Izuku felt a gut-wrenching lurch, and then he was falling. He splashed into cold water, the shock of it making him gasp. He surfaced, sputtering, to find himself in the shipwreck zone of the USJ. Mineta, the small, purple-haired boy, was flailing wildly beside him. Tsuyu Asui, the frog-like girl, was calmly treading water. "This is bad, Ribbit," Tsuyu said, her expression unreadable. Before they could formulate a plan, the water around them began to churn. Villains with aquatic quirks burst from the depths, their faces twisted in cruel grins. "Fresh meat for the grinder," one of them cackled, lunging toward Mineta. Instinct took over. Izuku didn't have time for a complex warp. He needed to move now. He pictured the spot 5 meters away, next to the side of the boat, and pulled. The world lurched. For a split second, he felt a sensation like being turned inside out. He vanished from his spot in the water and reappeared beside the boat with a jarring pop. The movement was clumsy, uncontrolled. His vision blurred for a moment, and his nose instantly started bleeding, the warm trickle a familiar sign of overexertion. But it had worked. He had teleported. A blink. He grabbed Mineta and Tsuyu, hauling them onto the deck of the ship. "What was that?" Mineta shrieked, his eyes wide with terror. "No time," Izuku gasped, his head spinning. "We have to fight." He could still feel Kurogiri, a constant, throbbing ache in his senses, and through that connection he could feel something else. The villain was scattered, his warp gates spread throughout the facility. But his core, his physical body, was still in the central plaza, directing the attack. Down below, Aizawa was a whirlwind of motion, a dervish of black cloth and flying limbs. He was taking down villain after villain, his erasure quirk flickering from one target to the next. But he was outnumbered, and his main target was the Namu, the giant bird creature, which seemed completely unfazed by his attacks. His quirk, it's not working on the big one, Izuku realized, watching from the ship. And he's fighting Kurogiri, but he can't pin him down. He needs to take out the physical body. "But where is it?" Tsuyu asked, peering over the side. "He's just missed." "No, he's not," Izuku said, closing his eyes and focusing on the agonizing pressure in his head. "The mist is a distraction. His real body, it's protected by a metal brace, in the center of the storm. Aizawa-sensei keeps trying to hit the mist." The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He had to tell him. He was the only one who knew. They formulated a desperate plan. Tsuyu launched them through the air with her powerful tongue, and Mineta used his sticky balls to create a trap on the water's surface. As they flew toward the central plaza, Izuku focused all his will, not on his own power, but on his senses. He could feel Aizawa, a flickering candle of power in the sea of villainy. He could feel the Namu, a blunt, brutish presence. And he could feel Kurogiri, the jagged tear in the world. They landed just as the Namu caught Aizawa, slamming his teacher into the ground with sickening force. Shigaraki, the man with the hands, cackled, his voice a dry, scratchy rasp. "It's game over, Eraserhead." "EYZHWH-sensei," Izuku screamed, his voice raw. He ignored the Namu, ignored Shigaraki. His eyes were locked on the swirling purple mist. He pointed, his hand trembling. "The neck brace." "His body is in the neck brace." Kurogiri, who had been moving to intercept him, froze. His yellow eyes widened in shock. How could this child know? Aizawa, his arm broken and his face a bloody mask, heard him. With the last of his strength, he activated his quirk one more time, his gaze locking not on the swirling mist, but on the precise spot Izuku was pointing at. The purple vortex faltered. For a split second, a solid physical form was revealed, a man in a suit, wearing a heavy metal neck guard. That was the opening Bakugo and Kirishima needed. They had blasted their way to the plaza, and seeing the opening, they charged. Bakugo let loose a massive explosion right at Kurogiri's now vulnerable body. The villain cried out in pain, his misty form dissipating as he was thrown back. The tide had turned, but it wasn't over. Shigaraki screeched in frustration, turning his decaying touch toward Tsuyu. Izuku acted without thinking. He pushed off the ground, a 5-meter blink that put him directly in Shigaraki's path. The world lurched, his vision vignetting, but he was there. He couldn't attack, but he could be a shield. Then the doors to the USJ burst open. Standing there, his face a mask of thunderous rage, was All Might. "Have no fear," he roared, and the words were not a promise. They were a threat, "for I am here." The battle that followed was on a level Izuku couldn't comprehend. All Might was a force of nature, a hurricane of fists and fury. But the Namu was his equal. It absorbed his punches, its shock absorption quirk nullifying his immense power. Izuku could only watch, a helpless bystander. His head was pounding, the short-range blinks and the constant pressure from Kurogiri's warp gates having taken their toll. He felt useless, but his strange sense was still active. And as All Might fought the Namu, he felt something else. A new pressure. It was distant, faint, but it was there. A cold, dark, ancient presence that seemed to be observing the battle from afar. It felt like a black hole, a point of infinite density that passively drank the light from the world. The feeling was so profoundly terrifying it made the hair on his arms stand up. What is that? He had no time to ponder it. The battle reached its climax. All Might pushed beyond his limits, unleashed a flurry of blows that overwhelmed the Namu's shock absorption, blasting the creature into the sky. The villains, defeated, made their escape through Kurogiri's hastily reformed warp gate. As they vanished, Izuku felt that distant, horrifying presence fade away, leaving him with a lingering, soul-deep chill. For the first time, his dangerous, painful power had been a vital asset. He hadn't just been a walking disaster, he had been a warning system, a sensor. He had pinpointed the enemy's weakness and saved his teacher's life. He had protected his friends. The realization brought not pride, but a sliver of desperate hope. Maybe this power wasn't just a curse. In the aftermath, as the other pro-heroes arrived and the students were being accounted for, agents Kenji and Hakamata appeared as if from nowhere. Their faces were grim, their usual professional veneer cracked. They pulled Izuku aside, their movements sharp and urgent. "Report," Kenji said, his voice clipped. "What did you feel?" I could feel the warp gate," Izuku stammered, still shaky. "It was like a hole, it hurt." "We saw," Hakamata said, looking at the data on her tablet. The screen showed a chaotic spike in energy that coincided with Kurogiri's arrival. "Your vitals went haywire. You've developed a form of dimensional sensory perception. You can feel disruptions in local spacetime." "There was something else," Izuku whispered, the memory of the cold presence making him shiver. "When they were leaving, I felt something else. Watching, it was heavy and old." The agents exchanged another one of their lightning-fast glances. This one was different. It wasn't professional curiosity, it was alarm. "Describe it," Kenji demanded. "It felt like a void," Izuku struggled to explain. "Like a black hole, something that just takes." Kenji's face went pale. "All for one," he breathed, the name a curse. Hakamata quickly silenced him with a look. She turned back to Izuku, her expression hardening. "You will not speak of this to anyone, not All Might, not your classmates. No one. Understood? This information is now classified at the highest level." Before Izuku could respond, a woman he didn't recognize approached their group. She was dressed as a paramedic, but she moved with the quiet confidence of a trained operative. She gave the agents a subtle nod. "We have a perimeter," she said, her voice low. "The energy signature from the boys' teleports, we got a clean reading." She glanced at Izuku, her eyes holding a strange mixture of pity and intense scientific curiosity. "He's just a child, and he has no idea what he's capable of." She was talking to the agents, but Izuku had the distinct feeling she wasn't with them. She handed Hakamata a data pad. "My report on the structural integrity of the facility." Hakamata took it, but her eyes were narrowed with suspicion. As the paramedic turned and walked away, she melted back into the crowd of first responders. "Who was that?" Izuku asked. "No one you need to worry about," Kenji said, dismissing the question too quickly, but Izuku saw the look on his face. He was worried. Izuku watched the woman disappear, a strange feeling of unease settling over him. He knew, with an instinct he was beginning to trust, that he had just met another player in the secret, terrifying game that his life had become. And he had the sinking feeling that she wasn't on the government's team. The UA Sports Festival was a sensory overload. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that washed over the stadium. For the other students, it was a stage, a chance to shine, to announce their arrival to the world of pro-heroes. For Izuku, it was a tightrope walk over a canyon of failure. He couldn't use his power in any obvious way. A single major rift, a single uncontrolled snapback, and his career, and potentially the stadium's structural integrity, would be over. The agents had been crystal clear. Subtlety or disqualification? His goal wasn't to win, but to survive without revealing the true, terrifying nature of his quirk. The first event, the obstacle course, was a frantic scramble. He couldn't afford the energy for blinks, so he relied on his own wits and athleticism. It was at the final minefield that he saw his chance. While others tried to fly over it or meticulously disarm the mines, Izuku had a different idea. He took a deep breath, focusing. He didn't create a warp. He created dozens of tiny, almost imperceptible spatial lenses across the field just for a split second. To an observer, nothing happened. But to the contestants near him, the ground suddenly seemed to be a few inches to the left of where it actually was. A student with an engine quirk about to make a dash suddenly found his feet landing on a mine he thought he'd avoided. The resulting explosion sent him flying, but it also propelled Izuku forward on the blast wave. He repeated the trick again and again, causing chaos in his wake, using the explosions of others as his own personal propulsion. It was a chaotic, unpredictable ballet. He wasn't winning through power, but through calculated mischief. He stumbled across the finish line, battered and bruised, but he had qualified. The cavalry battle was an even more delicate dance. He teamed up with Uraraka, Tokoyami, and Mei Hatsume from the support course. He was the horse, the foundation of their team, but his real role was far more subtle. As they moved through the chaotic fray, Izuku became a ghost. He used his micro-distortions to create patches of slippery space beneath the feet of oncoming teams, sending them sprawling. He bent the path of projectiles, causing a web from one student to miss them by inches, or a blast of tape from another to wrap around the wrong target. These were tiny, fleeting manipulations, lasting less than a second, but it was enough. To everyone else, they just seemed incredibly, unbelievably lucky. His real test, however, came when they were confronted by Todoroki's team. Shato Todoroki was a force of nature. An advancing glacier of ice followed him, threatening to engulf everything. As a massive wave of ice surged toward them, Izuku knew a simple misdirection wouldn't be enough. He planted his feet, grit his teeth, and created his first true defensive construct. He didn't try to stop the ice. He warped the space in front of his team, creating a rapidly vibrating resonance shield. It wasn't a solid wall, but a field of chaotic, oscillating spacetime. The ice didn't break against it, it was disintegrated by it. The shield tore the incoming attack apart on a molecular level, shattering the ice into a fine, glittering powder. The strain was immense. The light on his glove flashed red, his wrist guard vibrating like a trapped hornet. Blood poured from his nose and the world swam in his vision, but it held. They survived. It was during this confrontation that he felt it. Todoroki wasn't just powerful. There was a conflict within him, a deep, internal schism that was so profound it was leaving ripples in the fabric of space. Izuku could feel the pressure of his unused fire, a coiled serpent of power held in check. It felt like a splinter in reality, an imbalance that cried out to be resolved. For the first time, he was sensing not just the use of a quirk, but the emotional state behind it. They managed to qualify for the final round, but the experience left Izuku shaken. He understood Todoroki on a level he couldn't articulate, and the quiet pain he sensed from him was deeply unsettling. The final tournament was a series of one-on-one battles. His first match was against a student from Class 1B, Shinso, whose brainwashing quirk almost ended his tournament before it began. It was only a surge of pure, primal terror, the fear of his secrets being exposed, that created a violent enough spatial snap to break the connection. And then came the match everyone was waiting for. Izuku Midoriya versus Shato Todoroki. As he walked into the arena, the roar of the crowd faded away. There was only him, Todoroki, and the immense pressure radiating from his opponent. The splinter in reality was now a chasm. The match began. Todoroki, as expected, unleashed a massive glacier of ice, an attack that had frozen his previous opponents instantly. Izuku stood his ground. He couldn't create another resonance shield. The strain would be too much. Instead, he did something simpler, more brutal. He created a small, focused major rift, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it tear in space, right in the path of the ice. The glacier didn't hit a wall, it hit a hole in the world. A huge chunk of the attack simply vanished, shunted into a pocket dimension that immediately sealed itself. The rest of the ice crashed into the stadium wall harmlessly. The crowd gasped. The commentators were speechless. "I can feel it, Todoroki-kun," Izuku said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent arena. His head was pounding from the effort of the rift. "Your power," it's crying out. "Why are you holding back?" Todoroki's eyes widened, a flicker of shock crossing his usually stoic face. "What are you talking about?" It's not balanced, Izuku pressed, taking a tentative step forward. This incredible power, you're only using half of it. It's hurting you. I can feel it. Enraged, Todoroki sent another, even larger wave of ice. Again, Izuku tore a hole in reality, letting the attack pass through harmlessly. The effort cost him, his knees buckled, and his vision started to go gray at the edges. Shut up, Todoroki hissed, his voice trembling. What would you know about it? I know what it's like to carry a power that feels like a burden, Izuku shouted, the words tearing from his throat. A power that hurts you, that isolates you, a power you didn't ask for. He was no longer just talking about Todoroki. But it's still yours, he screamed, tears welling in his eyes. It's your power, not his. The words struck Todoroki like a physical blow. Memories of his mother, of his cruel father, flashed through his mind. And this strange boy in front of him, this boy with the bizarre, inexplicable quirk, somehow understood. He saw the core of his pain. With a primal scream, a torrent of orange and red flame erupted from Todoroki's left side. The sudden release of energy was staggering. The temperature in the stadium shot up. The pressure Izuku had been feeling from him, the splinter in reality, didn't vanish. It exploded into a magnificent, terrible storm. Todoroki now wielded both ice and fire, a perfect, terrifying balance of elemental fury. He launched a final, cataclysmic attack, a maelstrom of freezing ice and incinerating fire. Izuku knew he couldn't deflect it. He couldn't tear a hole big enough. All he could do was meet it. He put everything he had left, his fear, his pain, his desperate hope, into a single, final act. He created the largest resonance shield he could manage, a shimmering, unstable wall of vibrating space. The two forces met in the center of the arena. For a single, breathtaking moment, there was silence. Then, with a sound like the world tearing in half, both attacks shattered. The explosion was immense, a mushroom cloud of steam and debris that rocked the entire stadium. When the smoke cleared, both boys were unconscious. But Todoroki was lying within the bounds of the arena. Izuku had been blasted out of the ring. Todoroki was declared the winner. Later in the infirmary, Izuku woke to the gentle beeping of machines. His body ached, his head felt like it had been split open. Recovery Girl had healed the worst of the damage, but the psychic exhaustion remained. He was just drifting off again when the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face kind, her clothes simple. She looked like a concerned parent, but her eyes held a sharp intelligence that reminded him of the paramedic from the USJ. "Midoriya-kun," she said, her voice soft. "I'm Dr. Aris Thorne, I'm a Quirk historian. I was watching your match. Your abilities are extraordinary." Izuku just stared, wary. She seemed to understand his suspicion. "I'm not with the HPSC," she said quietly, taking a step closer. "In fact, I'm here because of them." She pulled a small, metallic data chip from her pocket and placed it on his bedside table. "The government is lying to you about the Tatyama incident," she whispered, her eyes full of a strange mixture of anger and sorrow. "They're not trying to prepare you. They're not trying to help you." Her gaze met his, and her next words sent a chill down his spine. "They're trying to build a cage." She turned and left before he could ask what she meant, melting away as silently as she had appeared. His eyes were drawn to the data chip. His hand trembled as he reached for it. He didn't have anything to play it on, but he pocketed it, the small, cool object feeling immensely heavy, a dangerous secret resting in his palm. He knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was on that chip would change everything. The week of internships was supposed to be a breath of fresh air, a taste of real hero work. For Izuku, it was a plunge into an even deeper level of strangeness. He hadn't received many offers after the sports festival. His performance was seen as too erratic, too reckless. But one offer had stood out, a scrawled note from a retired hero he'd never heard of, Gran Torino. All Might had insisted, his expression uncharacteristically nervous, that this was the best possible placement for him. He should have known it was a trap. Gran Torino was less a retired hero and more a geriatric pinball with a jet propulsion quirk. The man's tiny, dilapidated apartment became Izuku's personal training hell. The hero, who had once been All Might's teacher, was relentless. He didn't care about Izuku's spatial warps or reality lenses. He cared about one thing: movement. "Your blink is sloppy," Gran Torino barked, ricocheting off the walls and ceiling, a yellow blur of motion. "It's a panic button, not a tool. You're thinking of it as teleportation. Wrong, think of it as a step. A very, very big step." He forced Izuku to practice blinking in rapid succession. Not just once to escape danger, but over and over again. 5 meters to the left, 5 to the right, 10 up to the ceiling, 5 back down. It was agonizing. Each blink was a miniature version of the gut-wrenching lurch from the USJ, accompanied by a fresh spike of pain in his head. The world became a nauseating slideshow of disjointed images. "You're tearing space, boy, not walking through it," Gran Torino yelled, kicking him in the back mid-blink and sending him sprawling. "Be gentle, find the seam and slip through it. Don't just punch a hole." Slowly, through the pain and the constant, throbbing migraines, Izuku began to understand. He started to feel the seams Gran Torino was talking about, the subtle lines of weakness in the fabric of spacetime. He learned to ease into the blinks, to make them less a violent tear and more a smooth transition. The jarring pop was replaced by a soft whoosh. The teleportation was evolving, becoming a refined technique he started calling spatial hopping. In the evenings, when he wasn't dodging his maniacal new mentor, his mind was consumed by the data chip Dr. Thorne had given him. He'd bought a cheap burner laptop, terrified of plugging the chip into anything connected to UACE network. In the privacy of a small internet cafe, he finally saw what was on it. It wasn't just the horrifying video from the Tatyama incident. It was research notes, energy readings, and frantic, paranoid diary entries from Dr. Eris Thorne, the man who had unraveled. The files detailed his slow descent into madness as his quirk grew beyond his control. He wrote about space feeling thin, about seeing things in the periphery of his vision, about the constant, agonizing pressure in his head. It was a mirror of Izuku's own experiences, amplified 100 times. The final file was a short audio log, recorded just hours before the collapse. Dr. Thorne's voice was a ragged whisper. "They think it's a quirk," he rasped, his words interspersed with pained gasps. "A biological function. They're wrong. It's not in my DNA. It's attached to me, an anchor holding a piece of some other, hungrier reality in place. And I think my anchor is starting to rust." A chill washed over Izuku. An anchor. The word echoed the warning scrawled on the whiteboard in the final frame of the video. This wasn't a power he possessed. It was a responsibility he was tethered to. His internship took an unexpected turn when Ida sent out a desperate, coded emergency text. He was in Hasu City, and he was in trouble. Izuku, using the location data from the message, knew he had to go. He left a hasty note for Gran Torino and raced to the train station. As the bullet train sped toward Hasu, a new sensation began to creep into his awareness. It started as a low hum in the back of his mind, a subtle pressure against his dimensional sense. But as they got closer to the city, the hum grew louder, more insistent. It was a feeling of intense, focused malice. A predatory stillness that was so profound, it was creating ripples in spacetime. This wasn't the chaotic wrongness of Kurogiri's warp gates. This was the chillingly precise aura of a single individual. It felt like a razor's edge pressing against the world. He arrived in Hasu to find the city in chaos. Namu were rampaging through the streets, heroes battling them at every corner. But the pressure, the chilling ripple of bloodlust, was coming from a different direction. It was a beacon of hate in the storm of chaos. Guided by this terrible sense, Izuku leaped across rooftops, his new spatial hopping technique allowing him to clear alleys and streets with a series of disorienting, near-instantaneous steps. He found them in a dark, narrow alley. Ida was on the ground, paralyzed. The pro-hero native was pinned against the wall, bleeding, and standing over them was a figure that seemed to have been ripped from a nightmare. A man covered in blades, his tattered red scarf like a splash of blood in the darkness. The hero killer, Stain. The pressure Izuku had been feeling was radiating from him in waves. His bloodlust was so potent it was a physical force, a weight on the air. "Another fake hero come to die," Stain hissed, his long, reptilian tongue flicking out to taste the air. There was no time for a plan. Izuku activated his quirk, hopping from one side of the alley to the other, a disorienting blur of motion. Stain's eyes widened, his tracking skills momentarily thrown off by the impossible movement. "What is this sorcery?" he snarled, lashing out with a blade. Izuku blinked again, appearing behind him. He couldn't risk a direct attack, but he could create openings. He focused, creating a thin, focused spatial warp, not a shield, but a blade. A shimmering, invisible line of distorted reality about a foot long, a distortion blade. He swung it not at Stain, but at the ropes holding native to the wall. The blade passed through the ropes without resistance, severing them cleanly. The feedback from the sharp, precise cut was like a psychic paper cut, a sharp sting in his mind, but it worked. "Get out of here," Izuku yelled at the pro-hero. Stain was furious. He moved with terrifying speed, his blades a whirlwind of death. Izuku was forced back, hopping frantically to avoid the attacks. He wasn't fast enough. Stain's blade sliced across his leg, a searing line of pain. He tasted blood and then his body went rigid. He was paralyzed. Stain loomed over him, his blade raised. Your ideals are admirable, but your power is an abomination. You twist the world to your will, that is not the path of a hero. Just as the blade was about to fall, a torrent of flame filled the alley. Todoroki had arrived. The battle that followed was a desperate, chaotic affair. Todoroki's ice and fire kept Stain at bay, while Izuku, his paralysis wearing off, provided support. He used his spatial hopping to pull Ida out of the line of fire, to dodge attacks, and to create distractions. He was getting better faster. The hops were becoming more fluid, the strain less debilitating. He realized he could chain them together 2, 3, 4 in a row before the vertigo became overwhelming. In a final, desperate gambit, as Stain lunged for Todoroki, Izuku attempted his most complex move yet. He created a distortion blade in his hand, and in the same instant, hopped directly in front of Stain. He couldn't beat him in a sword fight, but he could block. The clash of Stain's steel blade against Izuku's blade of pure, warped space created a sound that was deeply wrong, a high-pitched, screeching whine of protesting physics. A shower of purple sparks erupted at the point of impact. The strain was immense. Izuku felt like his skull was going to crack open, but the block held. It gave Todoroki the opening he needed to encase Stain's legs in a block of solid ice. They had won. As they stood over the defeated hero killer, surrounded by the arriving pro-heroes, Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Gran Torino. The old hero didn't look angry. He looked impressed. "You're still sloppy, kid," he grunted, "but you're learning." Later, as they were being lectured by the chief of police for their vigilantism, Izuku's mind was elsewhere. He had faced down a killer, saved his friends, and pushed his power to a new level. But Dr. Thorne's words and the desperate ramblings of her father echoed in his head. An anchor. He looked at his hands. He had used his power as a weapon, as a tool. But what if it wasn't? What if every time he warped space, he was putting another crack in his own anchor? What if every victory brought him one step closer to the same fate as the screaming man in the video? The weight of that question was heavier than any physical burden he had ever known. He also noticed a new, disturbing detail. Throughout the fight, he had felt the ripples of Stain's bloodlust. But underneath it, fainter but persistent, he had felt another familiar pressure. The subtle wrongness of a warp gate. Kurogiri or someone with his power had been nearby, observing the entire fight. The League of Villains was watching. As they were escorted away, a woman in a paramedic's uniform caught his eye from across the street. It was the same woman from the USJ, Dr. Thorne. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval before turning and vanishing into the Hasu crowds. The researchers were watching too. He was standing in the center of a clandestine battlefield, and he was the prize. The mood at UA in the week leading up to final exams was a thick stew of anxiety and determination. The written exams were one thing, but the whispers about the practical were far more intimidating. Rumors flew that they would be facing robots again, but this time, far more advanced than the ones from the entrance exam. Izuku found himself in a strange position. He was no longer the terrified, quirkless boy. After the USJ and his confrontation with Stain, he had a new, fragile confidence. He had a measure of control over his power, a support system in his teachers and the ever-watchful agents, and a terrible secret that motivated him every waking moment: the Tatyama file. The night before the practical exam, he couldn't sleep. The words of Dr. Aris Thorne, the man who had unraveled, haunted him. "It's not a quirk, it's an anchor." He sat at his desk, staring at the burner laptop, the video of the disaster playing on a loop in his mind. He had to know more. He had to understand what the government was hiding. He called the number on the card agents Kenji and Hakamata had given him. Hakamata answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional even at 2 in the morning. "Midoriya, is something wrong? I need to talk to All Might," Izuku said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Now, it's about Tatyama." The meeting took place in one of UA's empty conference rooms, the city lights twinkling through the massive windows. All Might sat across from him at the long, polished table, his deflated form looking small and weary. Agents Kenji and Hakamata stood by the door like sentinels. Aizawa leaned against the far wall, a silent, brooding shadow. Izuku placed the burner laptop on the table and turned it to face them. He played the video. The room was silent as the grainy footage showed the laboratory tearing itself apart as the screaming man dissolved into a storm of chaotic energy. When it was over, Izuku looked directly at All Might. "Dr. Aris Thorne," Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly but clear, He said his power wasn't a quirk, he called it an anchor. What does that mean? All Might let out a long, weary sigh. He looked at the agents, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The time for secrets was over. He was right, All Might said, his voice heavy with regret. These dimensional quirks, they are not biological. We believe they are tethers, a point where an individual's consciousness is fundamentally linked to the fabric of spacetime itself. Most people are just passengers living within reality. You and Dr. Thorne before you are a part of the engine room. The government's secrecy, it wasn't just to protect the public, Kenji added, his tone softening for the first time. It was to protect you, Midoriya. A power like yours, there are entities out there who would do anything to control it, or to destroy it. All for one, Izuku whispered, the name tasting like ash. He remembered the cold, hungry presence he had felt from the USJ. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall. The man who can steal any quirk, what do you think he would do with a power that can bend reality itself? He wouldn't just rule the world, he would rewrite it. That's why we've been so cautious. That's why I am your failsafe. The weight of their words settled on Izuku. He wasn't just a potential danger to himself and others. He was a strategic asset, a doomsday weapon that the world's greatest villain wanted to possess. The pressure was immense, suffocating. So what now? Izuku asked. What do I do? You continue to train, All Might said, his voice regaining some of its familiar warmth. You continue to grow. You strengthen your heart, your mind, and your body. You become an anchor so strong that no storm can move you, and we will be here to help you every step of the way. The next day, the practical exam began. The students of Class 1A stood before the teaching staff, their faces a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The rumors were wrong. They weren't fighting robots. For this exam, Aizawa announced, a cruel grin spreading across his face, you will be pairing up to fight one of us teachers. A wave of shock and despair rippled through the students. The pairings were announced. Uraraka and Aoyama versus 13, Todoroki and Yahuyorozu versus Aizawa. And then the one Izuku had been dreading. Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo, you will be facing me. All Might stepped forward, and in a puff of smoke, transformed into his muscle-bound hero form. The sheer pressure of his presence was a physical force, a wall of power that made the air crackle. Izuku looked at Bakugo. Bakugo looked back at him. For a moment, their shared history of animosity, rivalry, and grudging respect hung between them. They both knew this was more than an exam. It was a test of everything. The setting was a replica of a city street, the same one where All Might had made his debut years ago. The objective was simple. Either cuff the hero or have one student escape through a designated gate. I'll handle this, Bakugo snarled as they entered the testing area, though his voice lacked its usual arrogant bite. You just stay out of my way, Deku. That won't work, Kaken, Izuku said, his mind already racing, analyzing the situation. We can't beat him in a fight, he's All Might. Our only chance is to escape. And let him win. Not a chance, Bakugo retorted, already blasting his way down the street. The first confrontation was brutal and short. All Might appeared before them, a Golden Age colossus. Bakugo, ignoring Izuku's pleas, launched a full-power assault. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. All Might weathered the storm of explosions without flinching, then incapacitated Bakugo with a single, non-lethal chop to the back of the neck. He then turned to Izuku, his trademark smile gone, replaced by the grim determination of a teacher pushing his student to the brink. Show me, young Midoriya, he boomed. Show me the strength of your anchor. What followed was a desperate, terrifying game of cat and mouse. Izuku used everything he had learned. He hopped from rooftop to rooftop, the short-range blinks becoming more fluid, more instinctive. He used micro-distortions to create illusions, to bend All Might's path, to create precious seconds of breathing room. But All Might was relentless. He was always there, always one step ahead. His power was absolute, his speed terrifying. He wasn't just testing Izuku's quirk, he was testing his will. Izuku led him on a frantic chase through the city, his body screaming in protest, his head pounding with a rhythm that matched his frantic heartbeat. He was just delaying the inevitable. He couldn't win, he couldn't escape. He found Bakugo slumped in an alley, slowly coming to. He's too strong, Kaken, Izuku gasped, leaning against the wall, his chest heaving. I can't do this alone. Bakugo looked up, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. I don't need your help, you damn nerd. Yes, you do, Izuku snapped, his own fear and frustration boiling over. And I need yours, stop trying to win, just for once let's just try to survive. Before Bakugo could retort, a shadow fell over them. All Might stood at the entrance to the alley, blocking their only exit. Nowhere left to run, young heroes. This was it. Failure. Izuku looked at the escape gate 100 meters down the street. It might as well have been 100 miles away. He looked at Bakugo, at his clenched fists and his face etched with furious pride. He looked at All Might, the unstoppable force. And then he remembered All Might's words, an anchor so strong that no storm can move you. He wasn't just an anchor for himself, he had to be an anchor for others. A desperate, insane plan bloomed in his mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and probably beyond his capabilities, but it was their only chance. "Kakin," he said, his voice suddenly calm, "I have an idea, but I need you to trust me, completely." Bakugo stared at him, at the blood trickling from his nose, at the desperate, terrifying sincerity in his eyes. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "What's the plan, Deku?" "When I tell you to, I need you to grab onto me," Izuku said, his eyes fixed on the distant escape gate. "And then I need you to give me the biggest explosion you can." All Might charged. "Now, Kacchan," Izuku screamed. Bakugo lunged, grabbing the back of Izuku's costume. At the same moment, Izuku reached out with his quirk, not at the space in front of him, but at two distinct points in reality, the spot where they were standing and the escape gate. He didn't try to create a portal. He didn't try to blink. He attempted his most complex, most audacious move yet, a spatial exchange. A direct, one-to-one swap of two locations in spacetime. The strain was instantaneous and apocalyptic. It felt like his brain was being ripped in two. The world dissolved into a screaming kaleidoscope of color and light. The light on his wrist guards didn't just turn red, it shattered. He felt blood pour from his eyes, his ears, his nose. The warp was unstable, threatening to tear itself and them apart. Reality itself seemed to be cracking, splintering around them. "Bhkogo," he shrieked through the agony. Bakugo, caught in the vortex of screaming, paradoxical energy, didn't hesitate. He trusted him. He aimed his gauntlet not at All Might, but straight down at the ground and pulled the pin. Maximum power, the resulting explosion was colossal, but its force wasn't directed outward. It was poured directly into the unstable warp. The massive influx of raw kinetic energy did something Izuku had never intended but somehow instinctively understood. It stabilized the exchange. It was like a blacksmith's hammer striking a warped piece of metal, forcing it back into shape. For a single, silent moment, they existed in both places at once. Then with a final, juddering lurch, the exchange completed. They were standing at the escape gate. The screaming vortex of light vanished, leaving only the thunderous echo of Bakugo's blast. Down the street where they had just been, a perfect, circular chunk of the alleyway now stood, a patch of asphalt and brick where the escape gate had been. All Might stood frozen, staring in utter disbelief at the impossible transposition. Izuku collapsed, his consciousness fading. The last thing he saw was Bakugo, standing over him, panting, his face a mixture of terror, confusion, and a new, profound, grudging respect. They had done it. They had passed. In the aftermath, the mood was somber. The agents, Hakamata and Kenji, cornered him as he was leaving the infirmary. Their friendly demeanor, the thin pretense of being counselors, was completely gone. Their faces were cold, hard masks of professional fury. "What were you thinking?" Kenji hissed, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "A full spatial transposition. Do you have any idea how close you came to causing a catastrophic rift?" We had to pass," Izuku stammered, leaning against the wall for support. "Passing the exam is irrelevant," Hakamata snapped. "You have been in contact with the Tatyama survivors, haven't you? That woman Thorn, she gave you something." It wasn't a question. Izuku's silence was all the confirmation they needed. Hakamata's eyes were like chips of ice. "This has escalated. Your willingness to use such a dangerous technique, your contact with a rogue element, the Commission can no longer treat you as just a student." She held up a formal document. The words burned themselves into Izuku's brain. "Threat level, Class A, high priority." "Your privileges are revoked," Kenji said, his voice flat and final. "You will report to us for training every morning and every evening. You will not engage in any unauthorized quirk usage. You will not act without our direct authorization. You are no longer just a student, Midoriya. You are a ward of the HPSC. For the safety of the world." The promotion to Class A, high priority, felt like a physical chain. Izuku's life, once his own, was now meticulously scheduled and monitored by the HPSC. His mornings and evenings were spent in the bunker with the agents, pushing his limits under their cold, clinical observation. His school life was the only pocket of normalcy he had left, but even that was tinged with the constant weight of his secret. The summer training camp was meant to be a reprieve, a chance for Class 1A to bond and push their quirks to the next level in the idyllic wilderness. For Izuku, it was just a change of venue for his cage. Agents Kenji and Hakamata were there, of course, disguised as specialist quirk counselors assigned to the camp. The training was intense. The Wild Pussycats, a team of flamboyant and terrifyingly effective mountain rescue heroes, pushed every student to their absolute limit. Izuku's special training, overseen by Aizawa and the agents, was focused on one thing: area of effect. Your control over small distortions is improving, Hakamata noted, her arms crossed as she watched him from the edge of a clearing. But in a real-world crisis, a 5-centimeter warp isn't going to save anyone. You need to learn to project your power to influence a larger space. His task was to create and sustain a two-way portal. Not just a blink or a tear, but a stable, traversable window in space. It was the next logical step, and it was exponentially more difficult than anything he had attempted before. A blink was a brute force shove. A portal required him to hold two separate points in space in a delicate, sustained connection. He spent hours trying. The first attempts were disastrous. He'd managed to open a shimmering, unstable rift, but the other end would be a chaotic mess, opening onto the wrong location or collapsing instantly. The feedback was brutal. Each failed portal felt like his brain was being stretched and snapped like a rubber band. Slowly, he began to make progress. He learned to feel his way to the target location, using his dimensional sense as a guide. By the third day of the camp, he could create a small, 1-meter portal between 2 points up to 20 meters apart. He could only hold it open for a few seconds, and the strain left him dizzy and bleeding from the nose, but it was a start. He was building a new tool. The night of the test of courage, the atmosphere was light, filled with the excited chatter of his classmates. For a few brief moments, Izuku felt like a normal teenager, laughing with Ida and Uraraka as they prepared to walk the spooky forest trail. The normalcy was a fragile, beautiful bubble, and then it burst. A sweet, cloying smell drifted through the trees. Then the forest erupted in blue flame. The Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains had arrived. Panic erupted. The students scattered, their playful screams turning into cries of genuine terror. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. He saw the pussycat Mandalay sending out a telepathic message, telling the students to avoid combat. He also felt it, the familiar, jagged wrongness of a warp gate. Korogiri or someone with his power was here. They were cutting off the escape routes. In the chaos, he saw Koda, the pussycat's young, hero-hating nephew, who had run off to his private hiding spot on the mountainside. A spot that was directly in the path of a massive, muscle-bound villain who was laughing as he smashed trees apart with his bare fists. Muscular. There was no time to think. Izuku charged, his legs pumping. He used his spatial hopping, a series of short, disorienting blinks, to close the distance at an impossible speed. He appeared on the cliffside just as Muscular was about to bring his fists down on the terrified child. "Get away from him," Izuku roared. He couldn't fight Muscular head-on. The villain was a mountain of raw power, so he did what he did best: he cheated. He blinked himself and Koda 5 meters to the left, dodging the attack. The strain of blinking with a passenger was immense. It felt like his spine was being compressed. He spent the next few minutes in a desperate dance of survival, blinking himself and Koda around the cliffside, always staying just out of Muscular's reach. But he was tiring, his hops becoming slower, sloppier. The villain was relentless, his glee growing with every near miss. "You're fast, little hero," Muscular chuckled, his muscles rippling and expanding. "But you can't run forever." Izuku knew he was right. He needed to end this. He needed to do something drastic. He saw his opening when Muscular lunged, leaving himself momentarily overextended. Izuku didn't dodge. He stood his ground and poured every ounce of his will into a single, offensive act. He created a focused, 20-meter rift directly in the path of Muscular's charge. The villain, too committed to stop, ran straight into a hole in reality. His top half vanished into the shimmering tier. For a moment, his legs dangled in the real world, kicking uselessly. Izuku then sealed the rift. Muscular reappeared 20 meters up in the air, his charge redirected into the sky. He hung there for a second, his face a mask of confusion, before gravity reasserted itself. He fell, crashing into the rock face with enough force to shatter stone. He was out cold. The victory was absolute, but the cost was staggering. The effort of creating such a large, offensive rift pushed him to his limit. His vision went black for a moment, and he collapsed, his entire body screaming in protest. He came to, his head clearing just in time to hear Mandalay's updated telepathic message. "Students, you are permitted to engage in combat." Protect yourselves. We have also learned the villain's target, a student named Kakin. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Bakugo, they were after Kakin. He had to get back to the others, he had to help. But the forest was a maze of poison gas and rampaging villains. The students were scattered, isolated. A horrible, desperate idea began to form in his mind, a technique hinted at in the fragmented notes of Dr. Eris Thorn. A technique Thorn himself had deemed too unstable, too dangerous. A spatial network. He stood, swaying, and reached out with his senses. He could feel his classmates, small flickers of presence in the overwhelming chaos. He could feel Bakugo and Todoroki, fighting a losing battle against a villain made of razor-sharp teeth. He could feel Uraraka and Tsuyu, pinned down by a knife-wielding girl who seemed to be enjoying their terror. He had to connect them. He had to give them a way to fight back, a way to escape. He raised his hands, his fingers splayed and pulled, not on one point in space, but on a dozen at once. He tried to link them all to create a series of interconnected tunnels through the fabric of spacetime. The world screamed. This wasn't the clean, controlled creation of a single portal. This was a chaotic, violent act of tearing. The air around him shimmered and cracked, visible fissures of purple energy spreading through the trees. Small, unstable portals began to flicker into existence throughout the forest. A portal would open near a group of students, showing a brief, tantalizing glimpse of the main camp, only to snap shut a second later. The ground trembled as the network fought against itself, the spatial tensions threatening to rip the area apart. Through the network, he could see snippets of the battles. He saw Bakugo fighting with a ferocity born of desperation. He saw Todoroki's ice and fire holding back the tide. He saw a villain made of dark shadow overpowering Tokoyami. He managed to hold the network open for 10 agonizing seconds. It was long enough. He pulled Uraraka and Tsuyu through a flickering portal, depositing them near some of the other students. He tried to create a larger opening for Bakugo and Todoroki, but the strain was too much. With a final, deafening crack, the network collapsed. The backlash was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt like every cell in his body was being stretched and compressed simultaneously. He fell to his knees, vomiting, his consciousness flickering like a dying candle. The last thing he saw before he passed out was a villain in a top hat and mask, Mr. Compress, trapping the exhausted Bakugo inside a small blue marble. A warp gate opened, the familiar jagged tear in reality appearing behind the villains. But this time, as the gate opened, Izuku felt something new through his failing senses. He had felt Kurogiri's presence. He had felt the distant, terrifying void of All for One. This was different. Behind the gate, he could feel the void again, the cold, hungry presence of the League's true master. But it was closer now. No longer a distant observer, but an active participant, his will reaching through the gate. The League of Villains retreated, taking Bakugo with them. And as they did, Izuku felt that terrible presence focus on him for a single, chilling moment. It was a feeling of cold, analytical curiosity. A scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. Then, darkness took him completely. He had saved some of his friends, but he had failed to save the one they had come for. And in his desperate attempt to be a hero, he had used a power so dangerous that he might have permanently damaged the very world he was trying to protect. The cracks in the forest were nothing compared to the cracks forming in his own soul. The atmosphere in the hospital room was thick with unspoken grief and guilt. Izuku, his arms bandaged from the strain of his failed network, sat by Momo Yahoyorozu's bed. She was creating a receiver, her brow furrowed in concentration as Kirishima explained the tracking device he'd managed to plant on the Namu. They were going to save Bakugo. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. But as Kirishima outlined his plan to charge in, Izuku felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He knew, with the chilling certainty of his dimensional sense, that it was a suicide mission. "We can't just fight them," Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through Kirishima's enthusiastic planning. Everyone turned to look at him. "The villains who took Kakin, they're not the ones in charge. They're someone else. Someone I've felt before." He described the cold, hungry void he had sensed during the USJ attack and again, much closer, as the villains retreated from the training camp. He described the feeling of a vast, ancient intelligence, a black hole in the fabric of spacetime. "All for one," Todoroki said, his voice grim. He had heard the stories from his father. "Exactly," Izuku confirmed. "Kurogiri's warp gates are just a door. All for One is the one who decides where that door leads. If we just charge in, he'll know we're coming. He'll feel us the same way I feel him. We can't fight him. We can't even be detected by him. This has to be a rescue, not a battle. The plan shifted. It became a mission of stealth and precision, a ghost operation. Yahoyorozu created disguises. They would go to Kamino Ward, find the League's hideout, and get Bakugo out without ever engaging the enemy. Izuku's role was crucial, but terrifyingly passive. He was their compass, their warning system. He had to guide them through a hostile city, using his senses to navigate a minefield of villainous auras, all while keeping his own powerful presence shielded from the dark god at the center of it all. The agents, Kenji and Hakamata, were vehemently against it. They had confined him to the hospital, posting guards at his door. "You are a Class A asset, Midoriya," Kenji had said, his face a cold mask. "You will not be engaging in reckless vigilantism. It's too dangerous. For you, and for everyone else if he gets his hands on you." But Izuku, with a little help from a well-timed distraction by his friends, slipped away. He left a note, "I am not an asset. I am a hero, and my friend needs me." He knew the consequences would be severe, but it didn't matter. Kamino Ward at night was a sea of neon and shadows. The garish lights of the entertainment district did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere. As they moved through the crowded streets, clad in their ridiculous disguises, Izuku closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses. The city was a cacophony of spatial noise. Every quirk usage, every strong emotion was a faint ripple in the fabric of the world, but underneath it all, he could feel what he was looking for, a concentrated point of wrongness. The faint, persistent tear of Kurogiri's quirk, a lingering echo of the gate he had used. And behind that, much fainter but undeniably present, was the cold, heavy gravity of All for One. "This way," Izuku whispered, leading the group down a dark, narrow alley away from the main thoroughfare. "He's close." He could feel other presences too. The Namu, stored somewhere nearby, felt like pockets of dead, silent space, their multiple quirks crammed into their bodies, creating a null field that his senses slid off of. It was deeply unsettling. He led them to a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of the district. "He's in there," Izuku said, his heart pounding. "Kakin and the rest of the League, All for One, he's somewhere else. Close, but not in the same building. This is our chance." Their infiltration was a masterpiece of teamwork and teenage improvisation. They peered through a grimy window, confirming that Bakugo was inside, defiant and unrestrained, surrounded by the League of Villains. They waited, their nerves stretched taut as they tried to formulate a plan. Then the world changed. A shockwave not of sound but of pure power washed over the city. A hero, MT. Lady suddenly appeared, crashing through the wall of the warehouse. She was followed by a whirlwind of other pro-heroes, Best Jeanist, Tiger, Gang Orca. And leading them, his face a mask of righteous fury, was All Might. At the same time, another figure appeared on a nearby rooftop. A man in a dark suit, his face obscured by a life support mask. The moment he appeared, the cold, heavy presence that Izuku had been sensing intensified 1,000-fold. It was him, All for One. The pro-heroes had sprung their trap, but they had walked into a larger one. All for One acted with devastating speed. With a gesture, he unleashed a wave of pure kinetic force that blasted the heroes away. Then, a flood of that sickly purple mist erupted from the warehouse. Kurogiri was creating an escape route, pulling the villains and Bakugo out of the fight. "No," Kirishima yelled, moving to charge. "Wait," Izuku commanded, grabbing his arm. He could feel it. Dozens of Namu were being warped into the area, their silent, dead space auras popping into existence all around them. It was a slaughter. They had to get Bakugo now in the chaos of the teleport. "Kirishima, Ida, with me?" Izuku yelled, his mind racing, formulating a desperate, insane plan. "Todoroki, create a path. Yahoyorozu, we need a boost." Todoroki slammed his hand on the ground, and a massive ramp of ice surged into the sky. At the same time, Yahoyorozu created a powerful propulsion unit that she strapped to Ida's back. "Okay," Izuku said, his voice shaking but clear. "Ida, you carry us. Kirishima, you're the shield and the hand, I'm the engine." He closed his eyes, focusing all his will. He performed a series of rapid, short-range spatial hops, but this time, he was pulling the others with him. The strain was immense, but Gran Torino's brutal training had prepared him for this. They shot up the ice ramp, a disorienting blur of motion. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They broke through the wall of a nearby building, flew across the open space above the battlefield, and angled themselves directly toward the swirling vortex where Bakugo was being pulled away. "Kirishima now," Izuku screamed. Kirishima reached out, his hand hardened, yelling Bakugo's name. Bakugo, seeing his chance, seeing the outstretched hand of his friend, didn't hesitate. He let loose a massive explosion from his palms, propelling himself out of the villain's grasp and into the air. He caught Kirishima's hand. They flew past, a fleeting moment of impossible airborne rescue. They had him. They landed, crashing into the side of another building, battered and bruised, but together. They had done it. But the battle below was far from over. All Might and All for One were facing each other in the ruins of the warehouse district. The clash of these two titans was on a scale that defied comprehension. The very air seemed to shimmer and break around them. Izuku watched, a helpless spectator. He had done his part. His mission was the rescue. He knew with absolute certainty that to engage in that fight would be suicide. And then, All for One turned his attention from All Might. His faceless mask seemed to lock onto their position, miles away. Izuku felt his cold, analytical presence wash over him, a physical weight on his soul. And then he spoke. But his voice wasn't just sound. It echoed in Izuku's mind, transmitted through the very fabric of spacetime that connected them. "You can't have that one, All Might," the voice whispered, a dry, ancient rustle of sound that was meant only for him and the symbol of peace. "He is your failure. But that interesting little distortion hiding over there, that one is new. That one is a delightful anomaly." Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew what he was. "I think," All for One's voice echoed in his mind, filled with a chilling, covetous hunger. "I'll take it." And then All for One reached out. Not with his hand, with his quirk. Izuku felt it as a physical violation, a set of ghostly, ethereal fingers plunging into his mind, into his soul, wrapping themselves around the core of his power, around his very anchor to reality. And they began to pull. Pain, there was no other word for it. It was a pure elemental agony that transcended the physical. All for One's quirk was not a gentle theft, it was a psychic vivisection. Izuku felt the ghostly fingers of his power burrowing past his consciousness, past his memories, digging into the fundamental code of his existence. They wrapped around the bright, terrifying core of his spatial quirk, the anchor that tethered him to reality, and began to pull. His friends' horrified shouts were a distant echo. The titanic battle between All Might and All for One became a blurry, silent pantomime in the background. His entire universe had collapsed into this singular, agonizing moment. He felt his own power, the anchor, resisting. It wasn't a conscious act. It was the instinct of a cornered animal, a fundamental law of nature refusing to be broken. It held fast, refusing to be dislodged from its mooring in his soul. All for One pulled harder. The strain was unimaginable. Izuku's vision fractured, not into darkness, but into a million shards of impossible realities. He saw flashes of a world where the sky was green, a city made of crystalline trees, a silent, empty void filled with floating geometric shapes. He saw himself as an old man, as a child, as someone who had never been born at all. His past, present, and future were being shuffled like a deck of cards. He screamed, a raw, soundless cry of pure agony that echoed not in the air, but in the space between moments. And then his quirk fought back. It wasn't a push or a warp. It was a declaration of sovereignty. A scorched earth defense protocol. It recognized the invasive, alien nature of All for One's power, and it chose self-destruction over submission. If the anchor was going to be ripped out, it was going to take the whole damn ship with it. The effect was instantaneous. The localized area of spacetime around both Izuku and All for One began to unravel. It started with the colors. The grimy brick of the buildings inverted, turning a sickly neon green. The gray sky bled into a furious, impossible magenta. Gravity flickered, and for a terrifying second, the rubble from the destroyed buildings floated weightlessly in the air before crashing back down. The space around Izuku began to shimmer and crack, visible fissures of black, empty void appearing in the air. From these cracks, paradoxes began to leak through. A flock of birds flew backward, their wings beating in reverse. The sound of a car crash from a block away echoed through the alley, followed a second later by the sight of the crash itself. On the other side of the battlefield, All for One recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping his mask. He was feeling it too. The chaotic, cancerous data of a collapsing reality was flooding into his own quirk, threatening to corrupt the vast library of powers he had spent centuries collecting. This wasn't a quirk he could steal, it was a poison pill. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a mixture of agony and disbelief. This was impossible. No power should resist him. No power should be able to fight back. He was the master of quirks, but this wasn't a quirk. It was a fundamental constant of the universe, and he was trying to steal it with a lockpick. He was trying to steal a cornerstone from the foundation of reality, and the entire building was starting to collapse on top of him. He had to let go. With a final, agonizing wrench, All for One severed the connection. The psychic backlash was immense. He staggered back, clutching his head, his own power flickering erratically. The brief vulnerability was all the opening All Might needed. "I will not let you harm my students," All Might roared, his voice filled with the righteous fury of a protective father. He put every last ember of One for All, every last drop of his strength, into a single, final punch. United SDATES of smash, the blow connected with the force of a meteor strike. The resulting shockwave was apocalyptic, tearing up the street, shattering windows for blocks around, and creating a swirling vortex of wind and debris. When the dust settled, All for One was defeated, his body broken and embedded in a deep crater. All Might stood over him, triumphant, his fist raised to the sky. But his muscle form was gone. He stood there in his skeletal state, his secret revealed to the world, pointing a trembling finger at his vanquished foe. A symbol victorious but finished. For Izuku, the end of the psychic assault was just as violent as the beginning. The moment All for One let go, the immune system of his quirk disengaged. The cracks in reality sealed themselves, the impossible colors faded, and the laws of physics snapped back into place with a nauseating lurch. The sudden return to normalcy was too much. His mind, which had been stretched across a dozen different realities, collapsed back into itself. He fell to the ground, his body convulsing as his friends screamed his name. He was vaguely aware of Bakugo shaking him, of Todoroki creating a wall of ice to shield them from the aftermath of All Might's final punch. But it was all a distant, muffled dream. His last conscious thought was of the cold, hungry presence of All for One, not as a terrifying void, but as a frustrated scientist. An anomaly, a glitch, that's what he was. Not a prize to be won, but a bug in the system that needed to be erased. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was far from over. He woke up in a room that was whiter and more sterile than any hospital. There were no windows. The only door was a seamless slab of dark, non-reflective metal. He was lying on a simple bed, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit. The comforting weight of his support gear, the cant counters on his gloves, was gone. He sat up, his head throbbing. The memories came back in a flood: the fight, the rescue, the psychic violation. He instinctively reached out with his dimensional sense but felt nothing. The room was a perfect null field. He couldn't feel the space beyond the walls. He was in a cage designed specifically for him. The door hissed open. Agent Kenji and Agent Hakamata stepped inside. Their faces were grim, devoid of any emotion. "Where am I?" Izuku asked, his voice hoarse. "A secure HPSC facility," Kenji answered, his tone flat. "A place for individuals whose quirks pose an existential threat to public safety." "The Commission has reviewed the events at Kamino," Hakamata continued, her voice cold and clinical. "They have seen the footage of what happened when All for One attempted to steal your quirk. The localized reality failure, the spatio-temporal distortions." She held up a tablet. It showed a chaotic waveform, a graph of the energy signature from the event. It looked like the scribblings of a madman. "We always knew your power was dangerous, Midoriya," Kenji said. "We thought it was a bomb that we needed to teach you how to defuse. We were wrong. It's a doomsday switch, and your very existence is a temptation for the world's greatest evil to press it." The weight of their words was crushing. They weren't just containing him to protect others from his mistakes. They were containing him to protect the world from All for One. He was the bait in a trap the size of reality itself. What happens now?" Izuku whispered. Hakamata's eyes were devoid of pity. "Aizawa and All Might fought for you. They argued that you are a student, a hero in training, but the Commission has made its decision." Her voice was the sound of a closing cell door. "Your quirk is too dangerous to be in the world. You are being removed from UA High School, effective immediately. You will be placed in permanent protective custody, for the safety of the world." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Removed from UA permanent protective custody. It was a life sentence. His dream, everything he had fought for, everything he had bled for, was over. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, aspiring hero. He was Phenomenon I Z-1, a package to be locked away in a box for the rest of his life. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and bitter. He had saved his friend. He had survived the wrath of a god. And his reward was to be erased from the world. He choked back a sob, the sheer, crushing injustice of it all threatening to swallow him whole. He was alone, trapped. And for the first time since he had manifested his impossible power, he felt truly, utterly hopeless. The anchor hadn't just rusted. It had been ripped from its mooring, and he was adrift in a cold, empty sea. The world shrank until it was nothing but 4 blank white walls. Izuku's new home was a room, but he knew it was a cell. It was located in a subterranean level of the HPSCS headquarters, a place that didn't officially exist. There were no windows, no clocks, no connection to the outside world. The light in the ceiling was a constant, flat, artificial glare that never dimmed, blurring the line between day and night. The only feature was the seamless metal door, which would hiss open 3 times a day to deliver a tray of bland, nutritious food. The room was a perfect null field. He knew because he had tried. In the first few days, in a fit of desperate rage and grief, he had tried to break out. He reached for his power, trying to tear a hole in the wall to blink through the door to do something. But there was nothing to grab onto. The space in the room was inert, lifeless. It was like trying to swim in a world with no water. He was a fish on dry land, gasping, powerless. His life became a monotonous, soul-crushing routine. Wake, eat, stare at the walls, eat, pace, eat, sleep. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the hiss of the door and the frantic, looping thoughts in his own mind. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was a specimen in a jar, a dangerous object locked away for the good of the world. Despair was a cold, slow-acting poison. He thought of his mother, picturing her grief and confusion. He thought of his classmates, of the provisional license exam they would be taking without him. He thought of All Might, the fallen symbol, forced into retirement, his legacy now a boy locked in a cage. The guilt and the hopelessness were a physical weight, pressing down on him until it was hard to breathe. He spent most of his time lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, the fire of his dreams slowly extinguishing into cold, gray ash. One day, or perhaps one night, he had lost all track of time. The hiss of the door was followed by a voice. Midoriya. He sat up. It was Agent Hakamata. She stood in the doorway, her face impassive. All Might and your homeroom teacher, Aizawa, have been persistent, she said, her tone laced with a hint of annoyance. They have advocated on your behalf. The commission has agreed to a compromise. You will be allowed supervised educational materials. She placed a tablet on the floor and slid it into the room. It was thick, heavy, and clearly offline. The door hissed shut, leaving him alone with the device. He picked it up. It contained his entire UA curriculum, every textbook, every lesson plan. It was a hollow gesture, a cruel reminder of the life that had been stolen from him. For days, he ignored it, letting it gather dust in the corner. But the silence, the sheer, mind-numbing boredom, eventually wore him down. He picked it up and began to read. He devoured the textbooks, completed the assignments, his sharp, analytical mind a refuge from the crushing despair. If he couldn't be a hero, he could at least be a student. It was the only piece of his old life he had left. He was working through a complex physics problem when a flicker of static crossed the screen. A single line of green text appeared, stark against the white background of his digital textbook. Can you hear me, Anchor? Izuku's heart stopped. He stared at the screen, his mind reeling. Was he hallucinating? The text vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He frantically tried to access the tablet system files, but it was locked down tight. It had no network connection, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. Communication was impossible. He waited, his eyes glued to the screen. Hours passed. Nothing. He began to think he had imagined it. Then it happened again. The cage is designed to nullify QIRKS, ITDAMPNS spatial manipulation, but you are not just a quirk. You are a constant. You can still feel, can't you? He could. In the null field, he couldn't warp space. But if he concentrated, if he filtered out the oppressive silence, he could still sense the shape of it. He could feel the 4 walls of his cell, the metal of the door, the faint, rhythmic hum of the machinery in the ceiling. His dimensional sense was suppressed but not gone. They have cut you off from the ocean, but you are still made of water. Focus. Feel the room, feel the walls, map IT in your mind. The messages were coming from Dr. Eris Thorne. He didn't know how, but he was certain of it. The HPSCS cage wasn't as perfect as they thought. A new sense of purpose ignited within him, a tiny flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. He had a mission. He sat cross-legged on his bed, closed his eyes, and began to meditate, just as he had in the bunker when he was first learning control. But this time, he wasn't trying to create anything. He was just listening. He reached out with his muted sense, pushing past the dampening field. It was like trying to see through thick fog. But slowly, shapes began to form in his mind's eye. He mapped his cell with perfect accuracy. Then, he pushed further. He felt the corridor outside, the guards stationed at their posts. He felt the hum of the power conduits, the flow of the ventilation system. He pushed further and further, his mind expanding, creating a three-dimensional blueprint of the entire subterranean facility. It was exhausting, the mental strain immense, but it was a focus, a purpose. Good, the text appeared on his tablet a day later. You are learning to see the SEAMS. Now, the most important lesson. The one the government cannot teach you because they do not understand. They think your power is a storm to be calmed. They are wrong. It is a fundamental rhythm. You must learn to breathe with it. For the next several weeks, under the secret tutelage of Dr. Thorne, Izuku's training entered a new phase. He learned to feel the subtle, rhythmic pulse of spacetime itself, the universal constant that existed even within the null field. It was a slow, deep, powerful rhythm, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. He learned to sync his own breathing, his own heartbeat, to that rhythm. It was a form of deep, intensive meditation that calmed the defensive, terrified entity that was his quirk. He wasn't suppressing it, he was harmonizing with it. The constant, low-grade headache he had lived with for months began to fade. The random bouts of vertigo stopped. The feeling of being an anomaly, a glitch in the world, was slowly replaced by a sense of belonging, of being an intrinsic part of a system he was finally beginning to understand. The anchor is not a burden, Thorne's message read. It is a responsibility. You do not hold reality in place. You are the point through which reality holds itself. You are not a cage keeper. You are a fulcrum. The paradigm shift was profound. He wasn't a walking disaster. He was a point of stability. The realization filled him not with pride, but with a serene, terrifying sense of purpose. One evening, as he sat in meditation, harmonizing with the rhythm of the universe, he tried something new. He didn't try to tear a hole in space. He didn't try to bend it. He gently coaxed it. He found a seam, a place where the fabric of the world was pliable, and he folded it. In the palm of his hand, a tiny, shimmering sphere appeared. It was no bigger than a marble, but unlike his previous creations, it wasn't a distortion of the space around it. It was a new space entirely, a perfect, self-contained pocket dimension. Inside the shimmering sphere, he could see a miniature galaxy swirling, a tiny universe of his own creation. It was his first act of true creation, not just manipulation. A stable, beautiful thing born not of panic, but of peace. He smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile for the first time in months. While Izuku was finding his center, the world outside was moving on. All Might's retirement had left a power vacuum, and the forces of villainy were growing bolder. Class 1A, now with their provisional hero licenses, were on the front lines, helping to fill the gap. They hadn't forgotten him. Led by Ida and Uraraka, they had formed a small, secret Deku recovery squad. They refused to believe the official story that he had been transferred to a specialist school for his own safety. They knew he was being held somewhere. Their investigation led them to the Tatyama incident. Using their licenses to access restricted archives and cross-reference old news reports, they began to piece together the truth. They found the names of the 47 researchers who had officially died in a geothermal event. They found their families. Ida and Uraraka met with one of them, an old, bitter man whose daughter, a brilliant young physicist, had been one of the victims. He didn't believe the official story. He spoke of a cover-up, of men in black suits who had confiscated his daughter's research and threatened her colleagues into silence. He gave them a box of his daughter's old papers, things the HPSC had missed. The papers were filled with complex equations, theoretical physics that went far beyond their understanding. But one recurring diagram caught their eye. A drawing of a human figure with lines of force radiating from it, labeled the anchor. Meanwhile, All Might and Aizawa were fighting their own battle within the HPSC. They argued, they pleaded, they used every ounce of their considerable influence to get Izuku released. But the commission was intransigent. The risk was too great. All Might, his health failing, grew more and more desperate. He met in secret with a small group of trusted heroes, heroes who remembered the dark times before his reign, heroes who understood the true threat of All for One. They began to formulate a plan. If the system wouldn't release their most vital asset, they would have to break the system. The attack came without warning. A tremor shook the subterranean facility. Alarms blared, red lights flashing in the once silent corridor outside Izuku's cell. He felt it instantly. A massive, coordinated assault was underway. He could feel the shockwaves of explosions, the chaotic ripples of dozens of quirks being used at once. He reached out with his senses, mapping the battle. The attackers were not heroes. They were villains, hundreds of them, the Paranormal Liberation Front, and leading them was Tomura Shigaraki. Izuku could feel his presence, a wave of nihilistic decay that seemed to suck the very life out of spacetime. Shigaraki wasn't just destroying the facility, he was unmaking it. Concrete walls turned to dust at his touch, metal doors crumbled. The null-field generators in Izuku's cell began to flicker. The oppressive silence was replaced by the full, terrifying symphony of his dimensional sense. The space in his room was no longer inert. It was alive, humming with potential. He felt Shigaraki getting closer, his wave of decay eating through the levels of the facility. He felt the HPSC guards making a desperate last stand, their quirks and lives being extinguished one by one. Then a new presence entered the battlefield, a presence he knew with every fiber of his being, Dr. Eris Thorne. She and a small, well-equipped team of researchers had infiltrated the facility amidst the chaos. They weren't fighting. They were moving toward his cell with a desperate urgency. The door to his cell, which had once been an impenetrable barrier, suddenly dissolved into a cloud of gray dust. Shigaraki stood there, his face a horrifying rictus grin, his eyes filled with a manic, murderous glee. He was flanked by the remaining members of the Vanguard Action Squad. "There you are," Shigaraki rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "The glitch, the anomaly." He raised his hand, his fingers outstretched. "Master told me not to capture you. He told me not to steal your power." Shigaraki's grin widened. "He told me to just erase you." For a long moment, Izuku and Shigaraki stood frozen, a tableau of predator and prey. The air in the corridor crackled with tension, thick with the smell of ozone and decay. Shigaraki's grin was a gash in his pale face, his fingers twitching with the urge to unmake the anomaly standing before him. But the boy he was facing was not the same one who had trembled in his presence at the USJ. The Izuku Midoriya who stood before him now was not a terrified student. He was not a walking disaster. He was not a glitch. He was an anchor. His despair in the cell had not broken him, it had forged him. The silence had not driven him mad, it had taught him to listen. The isolation had not made him weak, it had forced him to find a strength that did not come from his power, but from his understanding of it. He was no longer a boy with a dangerous quirk. He was a fundamental constant of the universe, and this was his domain. He met Shigaraki's gaze, and for the first time he felt no fear, only a profound, serene calm. He had harmonized his own rhythm with the rhythm of the world, and in that harmony he found absolute clarity. "You can try," Izuku said, his voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the panic Shigaraki expected. The lack of fear infuriated Shigaraki. He lunged, his hand a claw of gray death reaching for Izuku's face. "Die," he shrieked. Izuku didn't move, he didn't blink, he didn't create a shield. He simply reached out with his power, not with a violent tear, but with a gentle, confident touch. He took the space directly in front of his face and folded it. Shigaraki's hand passed through the spot where Izuku's head should have been, his fingers brushing against nothing but empty air. The fold was a perfect, seamless, invisible maneuver. To an outside observer, it looked as if Shigaraki had simply missed, but both of them knew what had happened. Izuku hadn't dodged. He had momentarily edited his own location out of reality. Shigaraki stared at his hand, then back at Izuku, his manic grin faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "How?" Before he could process it, the battle for the facility raged into the corridor. A massive explosion blew out the far wall, and All Might in his skeletal form charged in, followed by a handful of other pro-heroes. They were bruised, battered, but still fighting. At the same time, from the other end of the hall, Dr. Thorne and her team of researchers arrived. They were armed not with weapons, but with strange, complex devices that hummed with contained energy. "Get the boy!" All Might roared, his eyes locking on Izuku. The corridor erupted into chaos. The pro-heroes engaged the League of Villains. Dappy's blue flames clashed with Endeavor's incandescent fire. Toga, a whirlwind of knives and manic glee, was intercepted by Aizawa, whose capture weapon flew through the air like a striking serpent. Izuku was the calm eye of the storm. He was no longer a participant to be saved or a victim to be targeted. He was the conductor of this chaotic orchestra. His mind, once a liability, was now his greatest asset. He could see it all not just with his eyes, but with his dimensional sense. He could feel the trajectory of every attack, the position of every combatant, the subtle ebb and flow of the battle. He saw Dappy unleash a massive wave of fire meant to engulf a group of HPSC guards. Izuku raised a hand, and a shimmering, two-way portal opened in the path of the flames. The fire poured into the portal and erupted from a second one that had opened directly behind Dappy himself. forcing the villain to dive out of the way of his own attack. He saw Mr. Compress trying to trap a wounded hero in one of his marbles. Izuku created a small, focused spatial fold around the hero, causing the marble to pass harmlessly through the space he occupied. He wasn't fighting, he was directing. He was editing the battlefield in real time, his movements economical, precise, and devastatingly effective. "He's controlling it," Dr. Thorne breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of scientific awe and terror. Her team was setting up their devices, creating a perimeter. "He's not just warping space, he's weaving it." Shigaraki, enraged by this display, ignored the heroes and charged at Izuku again. "Stop your tricks and fight me!" This time, Izuku didn't just dodge. He opened a portal directly beneath Shigaraki's feet. The villain fell through, vanishing with a yelp of surprise. He reappeared 20 meters up, suspended in midair, before crashing back down into a pile of rubble. This was the culmination of all his training. The panicked blinks with Gran Torino, the disastrous attempt at a network in the forest, the agonizing lessons in the HPSC bunker, the quiet meditation that had taught him the rhythm of the world. It had all led to this moment of perfect, absolute control. He turned his attention to his friends. He opened a portal next to a struggling Endeavor, and Todoroki, from across the battle, stepped through, unleashing a combined blast of fire and ice that overwhelmed their opponent. He created a series of short-range hops for Aizawa, allowing him to move through the battlefield with impossible speed, erasing quirks and creating openings for the other heroes. This was his portal network perfected. Not a chaotic, tearing mess, but a series of clean, stable, instantaneous doorways. Heroes would vanish from one end of the battlefield and reappear at another, their attacks coming from unpredictable angles. The League of Villains, who had been on the verge of victory, were suddenly thrown into chaos, unable to cope with an enemy who could be everywhere at once. He saw his opening. The core members of the League were grouped together, pressed on all sides by the resurgent heroes. Shigaraki was just getting to his feet, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Izuku raised both hands. He wasn't going to kill them, he wasn't going to attack them. He was going to do what he was meant to do, he was going to contain them. He reached out and took hold of the space around the villains. He pulled, folding reality in on itself, creating a shimmering, inescapable sphere of warped spacetime, a pocket prison. For a moment, the villains were frozen, trapped within a bubble of distorted light. Then, with a soft pop, the bubble collapsed in on itself, vanishing from existence. The villains were gone, sealed away in a pocket dimension from which there was no escape. Silence fell over the corridor. The battle was over. The remaining heroes stared at him, their expressions a mixture of terror and awe. He had just defeated the core of the Paranormal Liberation Front without throwing a single punch. All Might approached him, his face filled with a pride so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "Young Midoriya, you did it." "I did what I had to do," Izuku said, his voice quiet. The serene calm was beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He had won, but the weight of his responsibility, the knowledge of what he was capable of, settled on him once more. Dr. Thorne and her team approached, their devices whirring. "We need to get a reading," she said, her voice urgent. That final prison, the energy expenditure was immense. But as she looked at her readings, her face went pale. The scientific curiosity was gone, replaced by pure, abject fear. "What is it?" Aizawa asked, stepping forward. "The prison, it's not stable," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He can't hold it forever. The amount of energy required, it's bleeding. It's creating micro-rifts, echoes of the main tier." She pointed to her screen, which showed a series of faint, chaotic energy signatures spreading out from their location. "It's a beacon." On the other side of the country, in the depths of Tartarus, a man sat in a high-tech prison cell. His body was broken, but his mind was untouched. All for One tilted his head, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his unseen face. He could feel it, the faint, delicious echo of his prize, his anomaly, performing an act of impossible power. The boy had grown, he had become strong, but in his victory he had made a fatal error. He had created a beacon that even the HPSC's null fields couldn't hide. He had just broadcasted his location, his power, his very existence to the one person who knew how to exploit it. All for One chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He couldn't attack the boy directly. The immune system of that bizarre quirk was too potent, but you didn't need to attack a ship to sink it. You just needed to drain the ocean it was floating in. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his own vast, unknowable power. Not to steal, not to attack, but to begin a new, far more insidious plan. He wouldn't attack the boy. He would attack the boy's anchor. He would attack the stability of reality itself. The Tatyama event wasn't an accident, you know, he mused to the empty cell, his voice filled with the glee of a master strategist beginning a new game. It was a test, a proof of concept, he smiled, and it's about to happen again. Across the country, Dr. Thorne looked up from her screen, her eyes wide with the same horrifying realization. The energy signature of the beacon, it wasn't just a beacon. It was a catalyst. It was interacting with a network of dormant devices she hadn't known existed, devices that were beginning to hum to life all over the country. "Oh no," she whispered, her face ashen. "He's not just coming for the boy, he's coming for everyone." The final war had not been averted, it had just begun. And Izuku Midoriya, the boy who held reality together, was now at the very center of a plan to tear it all apart. And that's the story. Deku's journey from a terrified kid to a literal master of his own reality was absolutely epic. He truly became the anchor his world needed. What was your favorite moment? The cat and mouse battle trial or the final reality-bending fight? Let me know in the comments, drop a like if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe for more insane what-if stories. Peace out.